Okay, it's 6:30 and we like starting our meetings on time, so can I have a mover and a seconder to bring this meeting to order? Hannah and Coughlin. That the regular meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater, February 7th, 2018, come to order at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. I'd ask you, if you're able, to stand for the national anthem, and then we will remain standing for some reflection or private prayer, and Councillor Austin will lead us. And I understand there was royal assent on the new words, and we'll try it on.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Please remain standing. Please be seated. And I'll turn to members of council. Does anyone have a disclosure of pecuniary interest on any of the matters on tonight's agenda? Okay, I see none now, but if something does pop up, just mention it at that time. We'll make a note of it. So the first thing we have on the agenda tonight is a public meeting. And I need a mover and a seconder to bring that meeting to order. And McConkey and Hannah. That the public meeting of council held under Section 34 of the Planning Act for the zoning bylaw amendment application ZB-2017-019 by Earl Graham be called to order at 6:32 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. And to ensure we cover everything, I have a kind of prepared script here. So welcome to this public meeting of Springwater Township Council held in compliance with Section 34 of the Planning Act to give the public an opportunity to express their views in regard to a proposed amendment to the Township of Springwater zoning bylaw as amended. The first part of this meeting is to present the amendment. Following that, an opportunity will be given to enable those who have any comments, concerns, or inquiries with regard to this proposal to make their views known to council. In addition to any comments made at this meeting, written presentations would also be welcomed by council. If a person or public body who files an appeal of a decision of the Township of Springwater in respect of a proposed zoning bylaw amendment does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or written submissions to the Township of Springwater before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed, the Ontario Municipal Board may dismiss all or part of the appeal. Any persons who wish to speak should first give their name and address. All comments or questions should be addressed through the chair, and that will be me. Oral submissions will form part of the public meeting minutes record, including the name and address of the speaker as information collected under the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. The minutes of the meeting will be posted on the township website. So we're dealing with ZB-2017-019 E. Graham at 136 Queen Street East. I'll now call upon the clerk to confirm notice of this meeting and the dates on which notice was given.
Notice of this public meeting was mailed on the 15th day of January 2018 to the owner of the subject lands and to the assessed owners of 87 properties in the Township of Springwater within 240 meters of the area to which the proposed amendment would apply, and to all persons and public bodies as prescribed under the Planning Act and its regulations. Notice was also posted at the assessed property to which the proposed amendment applies at a location that was visible from Queen Street East.
Has the planning department received any correspondence in response to the notice of public meeting? Again, I'll turn to the clerk.
Correspondence was received from the Simcoe County District School Board stating no objection, Enbridge Gas stating no objection, and the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority stating no objection.
I will now call on Chris Russell, planner with the Township of Springwater, to give a brief explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposal. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor French and Council. The application you have before you tonight is a rezoning application required to fulfill a condition of consent as approved by the Committee of Adjustment in late 2017 with respect to a surplus farm dwelling severance. The application proposes to rezone the retained farmland portion from the Agricultural A Zone to the Agricultural Consolidation Exception Zone, AC-22 zone. This would prohibit future residential uses from being constructed on that retained farmland, as well as ensure that any new livestock operations that are proposed would be in keeping with MDS requirements. Staff's position with respect to the application is that it conforms to and does not offend the official plan policy at the local level, county level, and provincial levels. Approval of the rezoning application is required in order for the consent to proceed. I think at this point I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell. First of all, I'll turn to the public. Is there anybody that has any comment on this application at this meeting? And if something comes up later, as mentioned, you just forward any comments to the planning department. Okay, I don't see any from the public. I'll turn to council. Is there any questions on this application? I don't want to say any application is routine, but this one's somewhat routine. Okay, and my script says, thank you for attending the public meeting with respect to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and showing an interest in this matter. So I need a mover and a seconder to adjourn this public meeting. Austin and Coughlin. That the public meeting held under Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990 CP 13, as amended on a zoning bylaw amendment application ZB 2017-019 by Earl Graham does now adjourn at 6:37 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. So we have the following. And now we'll go right into the direction following the meeting, and I need a mover and a seconder, and basically it's recognized in public meeting we had and consideration for approval. So we have a mover and a seconder. Coughlin, Hannah. That the report from the planner regarding ZB-2017-019 Graham dated February 7, 2018 be received, and that subject to the comments received at the public meeting, that a bylaw be submitted to council for consideration and approval. All those in favor? Carried. And now we have another public meeting regarding building permits, and I need a mover and a seconder to call this meeting to order. Hannah and Coughlin. That this public meeting of council held under Section 7 of the Building Code Act 1990 S01992 C23 be called to order at 6:39 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. And once again, I'll go to a prepared script here. Welcome to the public meeting of Springwater Township Council held in compliance with Section 7 of the Building Code Act to give the public an opportunity to express their views in regard to the proposal to update building permit fees. The first part of this meeting is to present the proposal, Following that, an opportunity will be given to enable those who have any comments, concerns, or inquiries with regard to this proposal to make their views known to council. In addition to any comments made at this meeting, written presentations would also be welcomed by council. Any persons who wish to speak should first give their name and address. All comments and or questions should be addressed through the chair, and again, that's me. Oral submissions will form part of the public meeting minutes record, including the name and the address of the speaker, as information collected under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. The minutes of the meeting will be posted on the township website. And again, we're dealing with ZB. Oh, no, we're not. Oh. Thank you. So I will just turn to Director Ippolito to kind of introduce this.
Thank you, Mayor French, members of council, and members of the public. I have a couple of quick slides here to go through, and I'll welcome questions after that. So building permit fees 101. We often say that building permit services are on a user pay system. So essentially, those who are actually utilizing the services that we provide, and that's essentially to review building code related items, pay for the services. We review the permits, we issue the permits. The individual who pays for such permits is exactly the person who applies for the person, or the owner of the property, or something along that line. The tax dollar does not go into our services. Building Code Act, why are we here? So as Mayor French had alluded to, there is a requirement there for a public notice. We have provided notification, and the public meeting process is precisely to hear the comments from the general public. That's we are here tonight. So notice has been provided in the Springwater Link Township website, posting at our front office, and email notification to our building community. We started notification probably back in December of 2017, and we stepped it up and have been continuing doing that notification ever since. Building permit fees over the past 10 years have been adjusted. In 2008, we had a fairly major and significant adjustment of 27.6% of increase in the fees. In 2015, we updated the fees again, and that resulted in a 15.44% increase, and those fees have remained unchanged until today. Back when we did the 2015 study, with the assistance of Hempson Consulting Group, they made some assumptions on our permanent activity. They took a look at our staffing levels at that specific time, and they suggested maintaining what we already had, which was a reserve fund. And I'll get into that a little bit more. One other item to make note of, and this was kind of a new item that they indicated, was that we should be looking at the fees a little more aggressively along the lines of annually, and adjusting those fees so that we maybe don't have these large increases like we do. And that is essentially why we are here today. It's that adjustment that we're looking at. So permanent activity, as I said before, when Hempson did the review, they based the review on assumptions. What they did is they looked at development charge bylaw or development charge study at that point in time, which was a 2013 document, and they made some assumptions in terms of what we need and what we're expecting to get in terms of revenue. Based on that study, they were kind of estimating that we were looking at about 576 new units from 2015 to 2017. We actually have been a little higher than that with 731, which relates to about 150 more permits than what was initially expected. So things started a little bit earlier than we expected basically on that. However, things are probably going to level off next couple of years. Right now, if you look at the inventory of available lots in the township, it's relatively low. If I was to look at today how many available building permits for new home construction there is, we only got about 40 to 50 lots in the entire township, and that's including Stone Manor, are available right now, ready, shovel in the ground, start digging today. Now, with that being said, however, there's more coming, and we know that. Phase 2 or Phase 2C of Stone Manor will be coming along. We have some other sites in the Elmvale as well. However, right now, that's all we're looking at. We know that there's going to be more coming, we know there's more coming this year as well. With that being said, however, we sometimes like to look back in history and see what we are or can expect. And what we have found, if we look at history, is that we're seeing an increase here as a permit for new housing starts. The other items, the decks, the pools, the sheds, all the smaller items that usually go along with new home construction is increasing. And we saw the exact same thing happening early in the 2000s when we saw places like Snow Valley, Highlands particularly, really start to develop. We saw it was kind of like a wave. You have a little bit of a wave hits you, then you have a little calm, and then you have a wave that's going to hit you again. So we're likely going to see a bit of a wave along the lines of our smaller projects coming up. Smaller projects have a tendency of taking a bit more time. You have to maybe do a little bit more hand-holding with these projects. Right now we're expecting either that's going to level off or it's going to see an increase in the number of permits we see on the smaller project side of things. Reserve funds, as I mentioned. So we have put away, and we've been very successful with putting away some funds because we know that we're going to have these slowdowns. And we have these reserve funds specifically for that. This is something that council is fully aware of with reserve funds. Right now we are looking at about 1.1 million in reserves, but now's the time we know we're going to probably start diving into at least next couple of years. And we also know that we're going to have to spend some of the money too. So for instance, when we did our budget deliberations, we saw that we're likely going to be short about $114,000 this year. So we're likely going to be dipping into that. We also have expenditures, such as our permit software, which we have delayed getting. We're looking at getting it done this year, because it could be a very opportunity for us to get it done, as well as our vehicle replacements, which we're trying to continually make sure they're up to date and usable and reliable. And always there's the unplanned items that you just never know happen. We made mention about the consumer price index, and this is something that we have, our construction cost index. The Hempson report indicated we should be looking at this study here as a guide to see where things should be going in terms of our costs to keep up with times. And this is the index is the same index which is used for development charges. And when we look at that, it kind of relates to a 6% increase, essentially, since the last time we've increased the fees. And that is what we are proposing. At the end of the day, what does it really mean, dollar-wise? A standard house, 2,000 square foot, would likely go from $1,960 to a permit fee of $2,080 with a difference of $120. I am not including any decks on that, any other plumbing fixtures. This is just kind of a bare bones, strict house only. Decks, on the other hand, just because there are some adjustments we're proposing on it, and rounding off, kind of do have a little bit of a skewing effect. So in this particular case, a deck of 400 square feet, it only relates to an $8 increase. Overall, I provided this as in my report. Just, I think it's good to know where we are in relation to other places in the county. Overall, we're pretty average, or very close, above and below. Overall, a couple of the categories, such as the new residential front, we're actually relatively lower compared to the average. Industrial, we are very low as well. And as far as the agriculture, we are, again, probably one of the lowest. I think the only one who beats us is Wasaga Beach, and I'm not sure how many agricultural buildings they have in Wasaga Beach anyhow. So overall, we are fairly competitive out there against everyone else. Some other minor adjustments that we're proposing are certified models. We had this reduction or credit that we provided. We're suggesting to remove this at this point in time for various reasons. Temporary event tents, we're suggesting to cap that at a maximum of $350. We have seen more larger tents as of late. We're not sure why, but they seem to be a little bit more popular these days. This should help on that front. and solar panels on residential homes, capping it at $250. And this is our effort of maybe getting ready for net zero ready homes. Now, the other item is a proposal that which we are suggesting here is a 10-cent rebate on building permit fees if someone is interested in putting a residential sprinkler system. So I see the smile here from Councillor Hannah. It is something that we have been trying to work on. We're looking at this as a snowball. This is a very small item. We are hoping to kind of gather momentum and maybe gather some additional bits of snow onto it so we can make this a bigger snowfall or snowball at that. What I mean by that is this is one part of it. We're going to try to get some other people involved as well, insurance companies. This is just a small part. I am not aware of anyone actually even doing this in Ontario, so this will be a first. But we like to be first and unique here, so why not? And if anyone can see where that sprinkler head in this very nice kitchen, it's right over there. So the other part of it is we want to promote this to the building community. And no, it's there. If you can get a little bit of a credit from it, awesome, that's great. Maybe we can get a little momentum out there. Septic reinspection program. Our bylaws that we have, 2015-33 and bylaw 2015-34 are very much linked together. So we're proposing that the other bylaw for the septic reinspection also gets increased by 6%. It has very little impact overall to the residents. Next time it will likely have a major impact will be in 2021 when we got to do the septic reinspection program again in our source water protection areas. So we do have the hourly fee that might come into play with some properties, but very minimal is what we think. And just summary-wise, recommending a 6% increase, new maximums on temporary vent tents and solar panels, a new rebate, which we're somewhat excited about, a residential sprinkler system. New fees, we would propose that they come into effect April 1st, which is actually a Sunday, but it's brand new month, easiest way of administering it. And we are looking at updating our building service manual, which is essentially the building bylaw, as part of the process, just to keep everything smooth. Mayor French, back to you.
Thank you, Nick. I'll go to the public first. If there's any questions on the proposal. Yes, please come forward, sit down and identify yourself. Or are you going to just hand the microphone? Or probably sit right down beside Nick and he can probably answer your question.
Thank you. Your Worship, Dave Crane, C-R-A-N-E. Just a comment.
Address, please.
I used to live at 150 Mennel in Snow Valley. I moved recently, just closed December 15th, and I'm now on Timberwolf Trail in Snow Valley Highlands. So I've moved a kilometer away. My concern is...
Do you have a specific address on?
Yes, number 3, Timberwolf.
Number 3, okay, good.
It may not quite appear just yet. There's only 2 homes, I think, that have occupancy, but we're there, and it's wonderful. We enjoy the township. Everything is our expectations. We moved from a house a kilometer away with the same capable fire service and snow removal and waste and policing and everything. My home insurance was, say, $98 a month. I'm now $265, which has nothing to do with this organization, but I know we mentioned insurance companies. Once we, and that increased almost threefold because of a postal code issue, which, once again, I'm disputing with bodies other than this. But my concern is, if we go to this scenario where we're going to have fire suppression in a home, I would like insurance companies to speak to that, because the damage isn't from the fire, maybe as the fire department can speak to, but once those sprinklers come on, the fire could have been a small problem, but the water damage it's wiped out your house. So I think it would be beneficial for you people to actually have people hear from the insurance companies to say, what does this mean in dollars to folks like me? Because I've had 4 properties in Snow Valley, and I may have some more because we gravitate, my wife and I gravitate to this area. We like it, and it's a great place to live. So it's just something to think about, if you could just maybe digest that. And I don't know how you compel people, insurance companies, to come here and speak to those numbers, but I think it would be significant. And from a builder perspective, that's very pricey. And if I'm going to build another home, which I may or may not, that is significant dollars to me. So just something I'd like to table, food for thought.
Appreciate that. And Nick, would you like to comment kind of even at a higher level? Because I know there's been some kind of work done on this, so please respond accordingly.
My thoughts with respect. Thank you,
Thank
Your
you.
Worship. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and thank you very much for the comments. And I'll go back to a symposium I attended on November 2nd, I believe it was last year, with our fire prevention officer. And it was a symposium on fire sprinklers. And we dealt with quite a bit on residential fronts, fire sprinklers. A couple of items that were brought up, and just so you know, the audience who was attending, it was building officials, fire officials, insurance companies, engineers. So it was quite a good gathering of individuals and comments along the lines. And there are a lot of misconceptions. And I can tell you, there was a question that was raised regarding insurance rates and fire damage versus water damage. So that was brought up. And initially there was some insurance companies who were a little bit reluctant about insuring homes. Some of the response that we heard back from some of the insurance companies who were there was saying that was initially the case, maybe not so much now anymore. So there are a couple of insurance companies that are providing credit on that. Part of the snowball effect is educating. And one of the items that we're likely going to be doing is moving forward with promoting it, if we move forward with that, would be question and answers such as, is there more damage caused with sprinklers versus water damage versus the actual smoke damage or fire damage? So, and these are questions which organizations such as CASA, and there's a few other ones out there who have this already canned out, if you will. So it's just a matter of promoting it. At the end of the day, it's going to be the decision of the building community whether they choose to go that route or not. Okay.
No, as a matter of fact, just so you know, we did a delegation to the minister at the recent Roma, and it was interesting. She made similar comments to Mr. Crane, and you know, it's definitely something that is going to be kind of investigated with insurance companies and that, and obviously the building community. I think there's somewhat of a wrong impression, was my understanding, is that when one sprinkler head goes off doesn't mean the entire sprinkler system, the entire house goes off. And of course there was the comments made about, you know, well, people hanging their coats from sprinkler heads is probably not a good idea. It might break that little plastic thing. But do you want to comment about kind of residential sprinkler systems? Because you kind of showed a traditional one that we'd probably find in this. Well, actually, even this one here is a little more subdued. Is there any general comments on the sprinkler heads nowadays that are designed for kind of residential properties as opposed to even commercial properties?
There definitely are. There's different standards which are used, and usually on a residential front, usually a very different standard than what you would on the commercial end of it. And when you're talking about residential fronts, aesthetics is probably one of the biggest things. That's just only, and the aesthetic part is the easy part. And companies that come out with these incredible, you can't even tell it's there. It's invisible. And I would imagine that a house being built today is probably going to have a recessed sprinkler head, so you won't even notice. So the coat hanger issue likely won't ever be there on that front. However, there are other items as well with different standards and how much flow, for instance, you can do without a needing to get elaborate pump systems involved. So they are developing new ways, and it's always gaining momentum as it goes along. And you are correct. It doesn't, if the heat hits that fusible link, it will not mean that the entire sprinklers of that building are going to go off. It's one sprinkler head, and that's it.
The reason I asked the question or make the comment is, you know, we're not treading this into this lightly, and it will be up to a builder to decide, and working with the potential purchaser and their insurance company, you know, is there a risk reward? Because I think overall there's a movement that because of modern building materials, it might be a lower risk having some water damage with an accidental head going off than the resultant fire damage. And we're going to leave that up to the kind of the builder in that, and all we're attempting to do in our building fee is recognize that there might be some net benefit to the new residential building, and we'll see where it goes, I guess is really the idea. Any other comments? That's a very good comment, because it also came from a minister, and that consideration is definitely coming into play. And yes, there has to be a risk reward for the investment. Now, my understanding is there is a comment about the built on a new home build, because there was the comment from Mr. Crane that, you know, the cost could be quite extensive. And my understanding is relative to the cost of the building, it is not significant. Do you have any initial comments on that, Mr. Ippolito?
Thank you, Mayor French. Few comments on that. I indicate that the number which I use is probably very different than the number which may have been advertised or indicated. A reason for that is because, and just so those who are in the audience know, a lot of the advertisement out there will say that you can get a residential sprinkler head for $1.30 a square foot, or just under $2 a square foot. Realistically, and we're talking about in Ontario, where we are in Simcoe County, with the type of lots we are dealing with, which is fairly rural in nature, that may not be accurate. $1.38 to $1.70 would probably make a lot of sense if you're in Vancouver, where every single house of a production built house is being done with sprinkler systems. You can probably do it. In discussion with one of the major sprinkler not manufacturers, but installers, realistically, you're looking more like $4 to $6 a square foot. So it is a big hurdle, and cost-wise, maybe not as advertised.
No, and I think that's important, full disclosure. Anyone else from the audience? If not, I will turn to council, and I'll go back to the audience if there are further questions. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you, and I don't know if this is a follow-up to Mr. Crane's comments, but maybe to Chief Cavey. I do know that residents in the Anton Mills area, when dealing with insurance companies and it's kilometers from hydrants, they were able to use the fire pump or the fire truck or pumper suppression accreditation in Springwater Township. So I just didn't know if we wanted to maybe make that announcement this evening so that people will know to notify their insurance companies of our accreditation in Springwater.
Chief Cavey, I want to get close to a microphone. That would be great.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Councillor Coghlan for bringing that up. So the majority of residents in a sort of more built-up or suburban area within Springwater usually tend to have the benefit of fire hydrants. And in some places, such as in Anton Mills, you might be a little further away from a fire hydrant that your insurance company might like. So we do have a Superior Tanker Shuttle accreditation, which is up for renewal again this year. And basically we have a certificate that can be provided to individuals' insurance companies to prove that we can provide a minimum water supply for fire attack and rescue.
So yeah, I think that is an important point if there is any discussion with the insurance company that, you know, we have pretty broad coverage with equipment and in certain areas, as you mentioned, fire hydrants. Okay. Follow up?
Yes, and thank you, Mayor French. And then through you to Chief Ippolito, the $4 to $6, does that include the inspection fees associated with the sprinkler systems? Because I'm assuming that as a builder, if I'm putting in sprinkler systems, that's going to cause more inspections. So with the 10-cent rebate, would the municipality also consider offering no fee for inspection on that? Because I was talking to some builders who said the 10 cents is great, but if I'm building a 250,000 square foot home or whatever it is, the fee, the rebate is not going to cover the cost of the inspection that needs to accompany that. So I didn't know if maybe that would be considered as well.
Maybe you want to clarify that?
Absolutely. The 10 cents was based on a pro bono charge on doing the inspections.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor French. Everybody knows I'm a promoter of sprinkler systems, and our fire chief and other fire folks have told us in the past that the response time is more than 3 minutes, and if you're in a house and it's on fire, if you're not out in 3 minutes, you're probably not going to survive, and that's one of the reasons why I think the sprinkler systems are a good thing to have. I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest to Dave Crane that Jim Sales, the former retired fire chief from the city of Toronto, sitting behind you in the red sweater. If you want to talk to him, I think you'll get some good information on the value of sprinklers.
Any other questions on this item? Councillor McConkey.
Tents. You talked about the price of the tents. How many do we have in a year? I look at tents as being a festive type opportunity, and when I look at the amount that it costs a lot of money to rent a tent. And someone's doing this for, and our bylaw is quite tight on having entertainment in your backyard and using a tent. I actually would like to review that. So in looking at the cost of just an inspection for a tent, I find that hard to swallow, especially when I relate it to a permanent deck. Can you tell me why it's so high?
Mr. Ippolito.
Thank you. The rationale, or your first question, how many tents do we have? So last year we had, I believe it was 6 tents, and they seem to be going larger for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe that's what's happening with it. What we have found with tents, it's not really inspections, and just so you know, on the inspection side of it, usually it's either myself or the deputy CBO and our fire prevention officer who actually in tandem go and do an inspection on it. So it's 2 of us who are going out. Fire prevention is looking at the fire safety aspect of it. Building services looks at the washroom capabilities, structure part of it, anchorage systems, as well as some of the ratings as well, and the fire aspects of it as well. What we have found, however, it's usually not the inspection that we're spending a lot of time on, it's the review. So what I mean by that is, when you go rent a tent, and if anyone's who rented a tent out there, at least what I hear is, here's how much the tent is going to cost you, here's my flame spread rating, see you later. We'll come in and install it. They don't really provide much assistance on it. So I'll use another example here. If you get a solar panel, on the other hand, whoever's installing it for you will give you documentation. Here you go, here's what you need for a permit. It's a very much streamlined process. Whereas with tents, there seems to be a lot of extra assistance that we need to provide to the individual. So we do have a lot of back and forth, it appears. We'll have questions, why do I need a permit? My tent is over 225 square meters. I need an engineer now. Why? I don't understand why. So we find that responding a lot and trying to clarify and assisting the individuals who are applying for the permit, probably more than a lot of other projects, unfortunately.
Follow up.
I'll leave that for follow-up, and I think that we have to revisit tents in general and events at people's homes, because I totally agree with having festivities at your home. It's getting so expensive other places. We don't even offer halls that can hold a certain amount of people. So I do want to make it an easier process for people. So I think we need to look at it in the future, but I won't bring it here anymore. I'll accept it right now, but I could retract on that.
Maybe just for clarification, Where do we sit in kind of the use of tent fees relative to surrounding municipalities? That might be helpful.
I looked at this morning just in case this was going to be asked. Range-wise, it goes from $75 to close to $500. So it does range, and there's a big range there.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, through you, Mayor French. Can you explain why the average column F industrial fee is so much lower than the average? 47 cents, I remember, compared to...
And that would be compared to the others in that
Yes,
same
yeah.
category?
And the average.
Yeah, it's, one of the items, likely the biggest reason is when we had redone our fees in 2015, we blended a lot of smaller categories within F. So we used to have a fee for, a separate fee of different ranges for different types of type F building, an industrial building, a standard industrial building, warehouse, a mechanic shop, all these various types of type F buildings. Some were higher, some were lower. When we reviewed it, we essentially blended, we averaged out as much as we can. So you're always basing on what you have, information you have at that point in time. So we looked at the total fees we collected at that point in time, and at that point in time, that's what it worked out to as an average in order to try to get that 15.88% increase that we were trying to get to. If we looked at today, that might be very different. I will say, even from my own memory, back beyond 2015, we were always relatively low when it came down to the industrial building permit fees. They've always been very, very competitive on that end of it. Rationale why? I wish I could tell you. Every building department is a little bit different in terms of how they operate. Every township is a little different, so you will see fluctuations in the fees, no matter where you are.
Follow up?
Thank you. Just to follow on, I agree with Councillor McConkey. I had a situation where a resident was quite upset. They were holding a wedding in their backyard this last year, and they phoned me up and really took issue at the tent fee. So although it's not that common and not that big a dollar item, it's a sensitive issue. So I would like to see an items for future consideration coming back with a report, just basically explaining more fully what the exercise is about, what the need for a fee is, and just some examples of problems if you don't have a fee, and so that we can better explain it to those that come back to us.
Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Mayor French. Through you to Director Ippolito. First question is, you're talking about how building fees mean that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay any of the costs. Does that include salaries for the building department staff?
That is correct.
Okay. Second question is, I'm still trying to get my head around about this 10-cent rebate being an incentive. And you talked about a snowball effect, and I thought 10 cents is not even a snowflake. And I just get, why a dime? I mean, why would anybody do one thing or another thing that is related to 10 cents? I just can't get that.
Mr. Ippolito.
It's a very good question and a very hard concept to understand why, and it is a very small amount. So in the building fees, you have to justify why you have the cost. And maybe I'll answer two questions in the same way. So when we worked out the 10 cents, which I indicated was a pro bono, we're doing the inspections, essentially something that we have indicated. We're looking probably at about 2 inspections, plus a few, maybe a couple of hours of review time in terms of doing the reviews on sprinkler heads. So that equates to, based on a 2,500 square foot house, a certain amount of money on that. So that's how we came up with this 10 cents, just to justify the rationale for 10 cents. It is a very small item, yes.
Is it 10 cents per house?
It is a 10 cents per square foot.
Ah.
Of the $104, sorry, the fee of 104 cents, $1.04 would now be 94 cents.
Okay, so, yeah, that's what I didn't get my head around, that it was per square foot.
Yes.
Because that wasn't
Sorry.
stated, okay.
My apologies if I did not clarify that.
Okay, Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French, and just through you to Director Ippolito, I think too, like, using the 10 cents as an incentive is one thing, but it's a rebate. I don't think it's an incentive. It's not going to entice a builder to do such a thing, but if they are willing to do something, for commending them for doing something so progressive, and I also commend the building department for coming forward with this. Like you said, it hasn't been done, may not have been done in Ontario to date. I think it's a great initiative, and I personally don't feel that it is an initiative or an incentive to entice builders to do something, but I like that we are offering the pro bono and the 10 cents as a thank you, maybe, for being progressive in that. So I do like that.
Councillor Ritchie first and then back to Councillor McConkey.
Where's the government on these sprinkler systems? We don't hear of the government, so are they laying low on this? Do we see this coming out in the next few years? Where is it with other jurisdictions, other provinces? You know, enlighten us on that, Mr. Ippolito.
Of course. Other jurisdictions, such as the City of Vancouver, have a requirement that any new home being built within its boundaries requires a sprinkler system. A couple of other communities, usually in Western Canada, I would say Calgary, I know, is looking at it. There's I'm sorry, I don't remember the community in Saskatchewan who's as well doing it as well. They are slowly getting on board with that. Ontario just has not gained the momentum. I wish I knew why. It does not. I would imagine a lot of it has to do with the financing end of it. It is a very big ticket item.
Follow up?
Where these high rises that you see, like the condominium industry, has just exploded in the last 10 years. Is it mandatory in these condominiums that they put them in?
Director Ippolito?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. There are building 6-story wood frame condos in Barrie. Those would need to be sprinklered as part of the program. I would imagine most of the, and I can tell you most of the buildings you will see, which can be considered high-rise or more than 4 stories, will likely be sprinklered on that end of it. So there is a requirement there, yes, for some buildings, but not the low-rise residential at this point.
No, and I think as the comment is, it's a small incentive. We're being progressive. We're looking for safety in the long haul, and a builder may use it as a promotional item or whatever. Who knows? Councillor McConkey?
I just have a follow-up with source water protection. We had the residents that live near a municipal well, and they also have septic. So we mandated, I believe we were mandating those ones that were very close. They were going to have to pay the cost of the repercussions of source water protection, I'll say. And I got a lot of calls on that because I'll take a little subdivision. They felt it wasn't fair that 5 of them who lived near our municipal well were going to be the bearers of the cost when all of the community was actually using the well. Last term we found the finances and we found a way of making sure that it was shared throughout. Where are we heading with this? I know it was touched on, but is that if it's not to be brought up tonight, and we'll look at that in a different report, but if it's supposed to be part of this because you have to go out and inspect, I just want to know where we stand with it.
Director Ippolito?
So just to the history of what had happened there, through source water protection, there was a requirement if you were within a 100-meter radius of a municipal well and you were serviced by a septic system, there was a requirement there that the septic system had to be inspected, and that requirement is going to be there for perpetuity every 5 years. Back when we did it in 2016, I believe it was, we were fortunate that they opened up the Source Water Protection Municipal Infrastructure Fund, I hope I got that right, to allow the ability to use those funds for inspections of septic systems, which was not there when we initially started the process. So we're fortunate to use that. In 2021, we don't know what funds are going to be available at that point, or what to do with that. We still have to allocate. Now, what we still have to do is allocate, here's how much the cost of that inspection is going to be. And that's essentially what we did. So it was, here's what the fee is, move it from here to here, essentially. So we still need to know what that fee is. Okay.
Councillor Anna?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the importance of this bylaw, the way I understood it when I first read it, and I know we talked about sprinklers because it's an important issue, everybody's concerned about it, and thinks there's need to discuss it. But this bylaw, the way I read it, Nick, is that public are doing things or projects that are generating costs to the township. And while we're saying this bylaw is that if you generate those sort of costs, you pay for them, the taxpayers don't pay for the projects that other people are creating, and that's why I'm supporting this bylaw.
Yeah, and yeah, it is a user pay. Any other questions? Okay, Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you to Director Ippolito. In talking with council this evening, talking about the tent fees, if no amendment is made this evening, it would be another year before this would be brought back to council, or if not tonight, then when do we as a council decide that $350 is not something acceptable to residents?
Director Ippolito, I assume we could amend that portion at any time?
So we have to have the public meeting. We're doing it right now, okay? And we're receiving comments. There will be a follow-up bylaw that's going to be presented. Perhaps if it's the will of council that be reviewed, by all means, that can be reviewed. I would suggest, probably for the sake of not amending it at a later point in time, we've done that. We've talked about it. We will review it and bring it forward. We have to bring that bylaw back in an official process for adoption. And that will be coming before, if we're trying to get it out by April 1st to come into play, we've got to do that before then, anyhow.
Okay. Follow up, and then Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor French. And then if I'd like to amend tonight's motion then to incorporate, you said tonight that there are some municipalities as low as $75. I would like to know how they can afford that. And also if it's still the cap is at 350, but if it's still a square footage, to me, if you're going out to inspect a tent, is it really a square footage basis, or what can we come up with to encourage these events, because I think that they are unique celebrations that people do want to have in their backyard. So if we can come up with something, I mean, $75 would be great, but if we can come up with something to have an idea, if it was 6, I'd also be interested to know what the fee was for the 6 of the last year as well. So if I can have that information as part of the next council meeting, that would be great.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Well, so I agree that we've got to review this. So is there the ability to get a report to us in advance of looking at the bylaw? And my other question is, are there any townships that don't have any charge for tents? Which would be part of the report that I would hope we receive before reviewing and voting on this bylaw.
Yeah, well, I think even the wording of our recommendation here kind of opens the door to considerations, and we make the final decision based on whatever the report may be, and I guess we haggle it out here, and whether it be 75 or 100 or 150 or the amount of time that was put into those 6 applications, or maybe, you know, maybe we up the minimum square footage where the fee comes in place. So you will provide that information when the report comes back with the recommendation for the bylaw, and we will finalize whatever that fee is at that appropriate meeting. And I guess the loudest voice will dictate what direction it's going in. long as we have the right information and understanding, well, we have, to, because I know at the end of the day, we have building fees and that, because someone's afraid that a tent might fall on their head, and it may have been a tent that should have never been erected because it's not appropriate technical specifications, and it does actually bother me that, they don't hand over kind of structural, information like they would with a solar panel, saying it weighs this much and it could cause this much, this kind of thing. So I wasn't aware of that. I thought they actually handed you somewhat of a technical drawing and an engineering report saying this tent is designed for yada, yada, yada. So, okay. But anyway, you can provide that information in the report. Any other questions of Mr. Ippolito? Yeah, sure, please.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you, just before we move on to Director Ippolito and the building department, just through this process and every process that I've been experienced with, the responsiveness of your department and what you offer to the residents, I cannot commend your department enough for it. You have experienced immense pressure in your department, and you seem to handle it and still answer our emails and calls nonstop. So we are very fortunate to have you and your department working with us. So I'd just like to say thank you for that and your progressive nature in Springwater. We're very fortunate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So can I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn this public meeting? Coughlin? Hannah? That this public meeting of council held under Section 7 of the Building Code Act 1992, SO 1992 C23 be adjourned at 7:26 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. And now we will provide some specific direction, just to give you an idea. I don't think it needs amended because I think it is broad enough, but if someone wants to play with it, it's going to effectively read that subject to comments and recommendations received, and we provide some, during the public meeting, staff will bring forward an updated building fee schedule and bylaw for consideration of adoption at a future council meeting. So I think it's encompassing enough if everybody's comfortable with it. So could I have a mover and a seconder? Austin, Coughlin. That the report from the Chief Building Official, Director of Building Services regarding building permit fee review 2018 be received. That subject to comments and recommendations received during the public meeting, staff will bring forward an updated building fee schedule and bylaw for consideration of adoption at a future council meeting. Any further questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Ippolito. Yeah, and just so everyone's aware, a delegation from Colleen Forrest, the Forrest Group, regarding a proposed age-in-place retirement community, they have withdrawn their request because they feel it might be premature at this time, and they're doing some more work on it. That's why it's not occurring tonight. So moving on to previous minutes, I need a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Coughlin, McConkey, is there anything here that needs to be discussed separately? Okay, that the minutes of council item 10.2 through 10.4 be approved as presented. Any questions, comments? All those in favor? Carried. Now, minutes of boards, committees, and other organizations, 10.6 to 10.9, be received for information. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor? Alan and Richie. Is there any questions that we want to pull those for any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Now we're at question period, so invite anybody from the public that may have a question on anything on the agenda preferably, but we will open to other questions, and just give your name and address and pose your question.
Excuse me. Good evening, Mayor French and Council. My name's Sandy Agnew. I'm with the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition. I live at 1305 Scarlet Line in Oromodadi. And my question has to do with item 14.5, the Greenbelt Study Report. So the report raises some concerns, I guess, and possibly rightfully so, but it seems to be rather light on the benefits of the Greenbelt. And my question is council open to receiving comments from, I guess, the public and our group subsequent to this evening and before you get the final report, because there are multiple benefits which really are not addressed in this report.
Well, I think the simple answer to that, as you know, we're actually having a separate, because we waited until the province had its information sessions, because I guess there was some expectation that maybe they'd enlighten us a lot more, and I think anybody that was there realized that they didn't. So we are having a separate meeting, February 21st.
Okay.
We're moving our council meeting up to 5, and we're having a separate information session of our own on the Greenbelt. And basically we will be taking input and comments, plus there'll be a detailed updated report from planning, because planning now has had the opportunity to meet with kind of the planners in the ministry. So we will be having a completely separate session to gain input, talk about benefits, and whatever the case may be. We'll take inputs from the public, questions, comments at that time. So we're not really, so we asked for a report to be put on here because, as you know, both the township and actually the county, well, the county asked for extension of the deadline and they said no. We asked for meetings as a local council, something in Springwater, they said no. And so, but we did want to have a report on here to make sure that we got the ball rolling. And we decided that we'd have a separate session to gain more wholesome input on February 21st. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does, but it raises another question. The deadline is March the 7th, and if you're getting a report back from staff and having your public meeting, if you will, or input on the 21st, does that give your staff enough time to get another subsequent report done? And I presume it would have to come back to council again before going to the province. So I'm just wondering how that
we are going to get a report, and then quite honestly, that report and comments will be submitted to the ministry.
But if I might, that you're going to have your report done on the 21st, but you're only taking comments on the 21st, or public comments? Is that?
Yeah, yes, we're okay. Actually, I'll have Director Spagnol kind of expand on what we're doing on the 21st.
Thank you, Mayor French. I think the key point to make here with respect to the process that's underway is that this is a provincial process whereby the municipality is a commenting authority. So the municipality will provide comments from staff, and then there will be additional comments that will be vetted in through the commenting period from council. And this is a typical process on how the municipality runs things with anything that is reviewed, or any review of any provincial legislation or anything that's coming down through the process. So the way the 21st meeting is set up, or the way we're planning on setting it up, is so that staff comments are going to be provided as part of a report for consideration, along with a brief presentation about what the staff report says, about potential implications, and I agree with Mr. Agnew that there are benefits to the Greenbelt as far as that goes. I mean, anybody who's going to argue about protecting water resources and things of that nature, I mean, I don't think that's a winning argument in any situation. But the idea is that the comments from staff will be as part of the agenda through a report, Council will be able to hear any comments from anybody, any of the stakeholders who have an interest in the Greenbelt, to almost feed into what council wants to relay to staff to provide to the ministry. It should be understood that anybody who participates or who comes to that, so as far as the stakeholders that come to that session, that they should be made aware and they should know that their individual comments should be filtered in by themselves through the ministry, because it is a provincial process that we're dealing with. And the township typically does not carry forward the comments of stakeholders, unless for some reason, if council feels it's necessary, those could be included as part of council comments. So I hope that clarifies the process moving forward.
Yes, it does. Do you have further questions? Because I'm not sure.
I'll wait.
Yeah. Because I think that's the way, you know, and it makes sense to me. That's why we scheduled that meeting, and we will get comments in appropriately to the ministry in the timeframes that they've provided us with. Councillor McConkey?
I think it's very clear by our director is that the comments on the February 21st, yes, we will get comments from council, but the comments coming from the public at that time, it doesn't come through us to go through it. They go directly to the ministry. So in order to, but there was a sentence where you said you could provide comments to council. So I'm assuming if you have some feedback in regards to the Greenbelt and you want your council or councillors to be aware, then you should provide that to your council team prior to February 21st. So when we hear our comments from staff, then we understand your perspective. But we're not saying that they're going to get on the comment field. I think that it's still up to you to make sure that those comments go to the ministry. And that's my understanding.
Right.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Yeah, just further to that's pretty much the point I wanted to make. So for the 21st, which is 2 weeks from tonight, as you're well aware, the agendas come out the Thursday before, which is the 15th,
Right.
which is a week from tomorrow. So what I would recommend you might consider doing is getting your comments together, forwarding them to Director Spagno, and he can share those with us. They might even form part of the agenda that comes out by the 15th. So do that by a week today, the 14th. So that would clearly incorporate them in our discussion on the 21st. And then in answer to your question, based on the meetings that we have, the points that are raised, the questions that are raised on the 21st, that will allow enough time to have staff and council feedback before the March 7 deadline. And you could well amend your comments and send them in after the 21st, before the end of the month. So clearly they're part of the input by the March 7 deadline. But I reiterate the fact that has been mentioned, you also should be putting them directly to the government.
Yes, I can assure you we will be doing that. Okay, thank you. That clarifies.
And I think the important point here I'd like to emphasize is I'm not sure there's other municipalities that are actually having a separate meeting to gain input. We obviously are a large agricultural area. We want as much input as possible. But I think the key point is, and I keep forgetting it, this isn't our process. We get to make lots of noise and say, well, we think there might be issues here or wherever. We may comment on where some of the studies area are, but unfortunately, it's not our process. But hopefully, we're kind of getting the comments in from all stakeholders. Because my general comment is there's so many things floating around right now. The whole Greenbelt study, to me, is premature. Because we don't know what the natural heritage mapping is. We have no idea, the finalized agricultural mapping, what it's going to be. And by the way, the province has told the county, you have to decide what you're going to do with population allocations, over the next 2041. And they haven't chosen where of the 93 settlement areas that probably have some potential for development. There's a number of municipalities that are chomping at the bit that probably want some of that population, and I probably not a good idea to put a green belt over that particular area because you know, when you look at the map today, all the settlement areas have been excluded, and some of them appear that, gee, it would be nice if the green belt sign would have went through the middle of them, but they're not. So, I think we're trying to be as transparent and as open as possible and get as much information in. And as I think Director Spagno said, nobody disagrees that there's, that there's not some great benefits with the green belt because it's been illustrated, the existing one. But there's also some challenges, and so obviously we're going to provide the comments that are beneficial to all the residents in Springwater, not just a few. That's our job, and that's what we'll be doing.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
So
Thank you, Mr. Agnew.
the format for the 21st is the public will have an opportunity to comment then as well?
Yes, and I think they will, and as a matter of fact, probably whatever time it takes Mr. Spagno to kind of address, we were having some brief conversations on that, and we'll probably set a time block of an hour of comments from the public, and then obviously any written ones can be submitted at any time. But yeah, we want a wholesome discussion because something tells me this room is going to be very full and the glass doors are going to be open, and it might be worthwhile to kind of sell some kind of novelties or some concession, have a concession stand, but which is good, and that's why we're doing it. We're trying to be aware of there's different opinions on the Greenbelt, and we know that. Yep. And but we live in a democracy, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else have a question out there?
The report tonight, is that just going to be received?
Yes. Okay. There may be some questions, but I think most of it will be. I think most of the questions are going to come out of the next session. Yeah. So yeah, I'll take one more question. We'll probably eat up most of the time. Yes, we have.
Heather Rutherford, Springwater. I was going to sit quietly in the back, but I listened to your comments to the chief building official about tents. And I can truly say, as a former chief building official who has seen them go down, that tents are probably a huge liability to a municipality, and that permits cover not only the fact that the tent has been erected, it looks at all the safety issues exiting. Some of them need emergency lighting, some of them need exit signs. It's just like putting an industrial building onto a property, only a private property. And so when a municipality looks at a building permit, it should look at the liability involved with it. I think if you have a wedding party of 250 people and you have a failure of a tent, the liability is huge to the municipality, especially if it hasn't been inspected. Many years ago, I worked in Markham, and they took priority as far as tents were concerned. And I think one of them had to do with a disaster that happened in one of the municipalities. So when you're looking at your permit fees, I think your chief building official indicated 2 people go out to do the inspection, which is not unusual because there's a lot to look at. They have to make sure that nothing near the sides of the tent can burn. Sometimes people like to put hay bales in that for people to sit on. Well, that's a potential ready to happen. Those are the type of the things that they're looking at. I was asked once by my CAO how many times the building code talked about tents, and I can't remember specifically right now, but I think it was 10 to 12 times it's mentioned throughout the building code. That's how important they are. So when you're looking at this, I just want you to understand that even though it's a service to the public for them to be able to have a place where they can go and whatever, it's a disservice to a municipality to ignore it and to ignore the liability that can be involved with placing something like this onto a private property.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you for those comments. And that's basically what we want, is a little more information on the process, the potential liability, maybe some examples of what's not worked, so that we can be better armed to, A, make a decision, and B, communicate with residents.
I think Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you, maybe as a follow-up to this question, understanding that there are multiple aspects that are involved in the inspection, what portion of the 350 is fire and what portion is building?
It should all be, actually, it should all be building, because the building is I'm speaking right now, even though.
Yeah,
this
sorry,
guy's over here.
that was actually the director of building.
The building code has the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
No, I meant for cost recovery.
I understand that, but building code has jurisdiction. And that's something that quite often the fire department, unless they have been designated as a building official, they forget that. And I know that's an issue that happens in many municipalities.
Very valuable input. We could, no, and I appreciate that, because again, it's nice to have someone that's got background and experience, because I'm sure all that information would be brought back from, our chief building officer, but it's always nice to hear from someone else, because then we really believe him when he tells us. So anyway, thank you.
You should believe him. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. We will move on to correspondence items, and we're going to 12.2 to 12.6. Can I have a mover and a seconder? McConkey and Coghlan. Is there any of these we'd like to talk about? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Just run to action reports. Yes. So now we're on to action reports, and the first one's Stone Manor Woods, a reduction of securities. And can I have a mover and a seconder to get this on the table? Austin and Allen. That the report from the Director of Public Works regarding the security reduction for Stone Manor Phases 2A and 2B be received, and that the amount of securities retained be reduced by $1,716,960. So any questions or discussion on this? The report's fairly straightforward, but okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And the next is the extension of a draft plan on Scarlet Line. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Richie? Austin? The report from the planner regarding Township File SU-2002-001 Scarlet Line Plan of Subdivision Request for Extension of Draft Plan Approval dated February 7, 2018 be received, and the Township Council does not object to a one-year extension of draft plan approval, and the County of Simcoe be so notified. Any questions on this? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. The next is the sign bylaw, and I'll have a mover and a seconder to get it on the table, please. Coghlan and Hannah. And I'll read it, and I'll invite, obviously, the Deputy Clerk and the Bylaw Enforcement Officer up here. The report from the Deputy Clerk and the Municipal Law Enforcement Officer regarding the Signs and Advertising Devices Bylaw Review dated February 7, 2018 be received. The draft signs and advertising devices bylaw be approved and as presented and be brought forward to the next regular council meeting for consideration, and that a request be sent to the Attorney General of Ontario regarding the approval of set fines as it relates to the signs and advertising devices bylaw upon final adoption. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to whoever wants to start.
So through your worship, we just wanted to highlight some of the changes that we are proposing with the sign bylaw. The biggest thing being the inclusion of the home industry and the home occupation sign regulations. Currently, they're regulated through the zoning bylaw. And it would be easier for enforcement purposes and regulation, as well as communicating to the public, to have all of our sign regulations under one regulatory bylaw. That being said, if this bylaw goes through, at the same time, we'll also have to have a zoning housekeeping bylaw come through at the same time to remove it from the zoning bylaw. The other biggest thing is the inclusion of set fines. So currently, there are no set fines for enforcement purposes for the bylaws. So if there is an infraction, our bylaw officer actually has to go through court proceedings to enforce anything. So if we could find them through an infraction service, that would be much easier, less court costs, less staff time, and it's more of an incentive for the public to ensure they're following our regulations and our bylaws to ensure that there is no nuisance signs and they're not a public safety hazard as well. The other major thing is we're removing the application form from the bylaw. For us, most application forms are not included within a bylaw anymore. It's more of like a procedural process as opposed to making any rules or regulatory decisions in regards to the enforcement of signs. So this way we have the ability for staff to change it as needed for whatever our processes may be on who is even like receiving them, or if some standards such as the AODA comes into an effect and we have to update the form to meet accessibility standards. So right now our form doesn't actually meet those standards, so this will give us the ability to make those changes on an ongoing basis. The other thing to keep in mind as well is that municipal election signs are not regulated under the signs and advertising bylaw. That one was passed the end of last year, so that's a whole other ballgame. We did receive comments from Councillor Austin regarding this bylaw over the weekend, and the one thing that she proposed was the inclusion of the Elmville BIA and whether or not they were considered to be a not-for-profit. So right now under the bylaw, any not-for-profit organizations, the sign permit fee is waived for them. So under our current definition, which is a pretty standard definition for not-for-profits, the Elmville BIA does not technically meet those standards. It's more of like a charitable basis, not saying that the Elmville BIA is not a benefit to our community, and there are definitely other ones. So the bylaw officer, myself, our recommendation would be to include, so I guess we're amending our draft bylaw if possible, if you guys are so inclined, but it would be to include a definition that reads as community groups would be committees or organizations supported by the township who have a joint purpose to provide benefits to the community, which may include economic growth, community safety and awareness, or fostering community development. So if that definition is then included, then section 2.5 needs to be amended to read, the township may from time to time issue a permit for the placement of community notices for a fee or at no cost to not-for-profit or community groups to advertise fundraising events. So right now that would just be for not-for-profit groups. So that's kind of our highlight and why we're bringing this forward for review, but those are the biggest changes.
Councillor Austin?
Thank you, through Mayor French. Could you tell me what home occupation sign means? Is that for sale? House for sale, real estate?
No, so a real estate sign is currently regulated under our current bylaw, and we're not changing the definition.
Okay. So what's a home occupation sign?
So, I mean, Director of Planning can correct me if I'm wrong. So home occupation or home industry is basically like a home-based business. So someone who's running their office out of their house. So currently under the zoning bylaw, it's quite a small sign. I think it's less than 3 feet square, and it can only be affixed to the front of your house. So if you have a large setback, anyone driving past the front of your house would not be able to actually see the sign from the road, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a sign notifying your customers that that is where your business is. So even if they're allowed under the zoning regulation to have their business there, the signage that we currently are allowing doesn't really allow for proper advertising or for people to be aware that that sign is there, and that has caused a hindrance to some businesses in the past, especially those that have, for instance, like a 300-foot frontage in some of our more rural properties that are still zoned as a residential property. So for them, they haven't even obtained a sign permit in the past. So this one will allow them to have a sign that is the same square footage as our standard real estate agent sign, as well as to have a non-illumination. We have received inquiries and complaints about illumination in residential areas in the past, so that's something we wouldn't be recommending is permitted for those types of signs, just in keeping with the type of neighborhood that some of them may be in. So it allowed them to have a sign placed within the front yard, not on the boulevard, but still within their property boundaries, but something that would be visible from the roadway potentially.
And Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Mayor French. I want to thank you for when you get questions from other members of council for responding to all of us, because it helps all of us to be in the picture. I should have done the same, but I just hadn't have time, and I can tell you why if you need to know. Under definitions, you have a definition of highway, and I believe it's reasonably consistent with the definition of highway under the Highway Traffic Act. You talk in the report here a lot about the road allowance. I would suggest it might be of value to add the definition of road allowance also in your definitions.
Okay.
I just have a couple of quick questions. Going down to under home industry, I think it's about the third sentence down, it talks about that provides service or wares to the rural community. So when I read that, I got the impression that it doesn't apply to homes, if you like, that aren't in a rural community. And so somebody living, say, in Anton Mills or Elmvale that had a home business, would this not apply to them because it's not a rural community?
Yeah, so these definitions are pulled directly from the zoning bylaw currently, where they're regulated. So I want to say yes, it would apply to them, but perhaps Director Spagnol would be able to speak more directly about what areas would be required or allowed for those types of signage.
Director Spagnol.
Thank you, Mayor French. The home industry type uses are only permitted in the rural areas where you've got properties that are zoned for agricultural uses, typically on larger properties that are not within the settlement areas. Those are the only types of properties or the only zone that you're really permitted to have in home industry. The home occupations are permitted within the settlement areas on your residential lots, where they limit the size of the business that can go within those specific areas, within the settlement areas on the smaller lots, so that they do not have a great impact on surrounding properties. So they're regulated in the sense that you can only devote a certain amount of area of the house towards the home occupation, so that it doesn't expand to something that might have a negative impact on the surrounding area. So that's the difference between where they're permitted. So the idea is that home industries are permitted on larger properties in the rural areas. Home occupations are only permitted, or sorry, are permitted within the settlement areas, and home industries are not permitted within the settlement areas.
So I have to follow up to that. I should have read a little more of it, because it says farm implement, machinery repair shop, carpentry shop, fabrication, wood, metal products, craft, and studio, and provide services or wares to a rural community. There was a welding shop on Snow Valley Road where the gentleman works out of his garage on Snow Valley Road. To me, that's not a rural community because it's in Midhurst, but not maybe Midhurst property, but I wouldn't consider that a rural area. Am I right or wrong?
Director Spagnol.
Thank you, Mayor French. Through you to Councillor Hannah. It really depends on the zoning of the property. So as I indicated, I can't speak specifically to that situation, but if a property is zoned agricultural, a home industry would be permitted on that property, provided that it meets the specific regulations within the zoning. If the property is zoned R1, which is typically your smaller lots within your settlement areas, home occupations are not permitted under that zone. So as I said, the idea is that you have typically larger properties where they're zoned agricultural, where they may have larger buildings, and it may provide the opportunity for some value-added type businesses through a home industry provision under the bylaw.
Thank you. I'm still confused, but that's me. If we go to section 2, and it says 2.2, it says no person shall erect or display any sign or advertising device within 3 meters of the edge of the township road, including the boulevard. This is where it gets confusing to me, because is this, are we now talking highway, which is fence line to fence line, or are we talking road allowance? Because there's no definition of township road, but I have to assume a township road would be a highway. And if you're including the boulevard, is that the boulevard that's on the person's resident on their own personal property, or is the boulevard part of the road allowance? I'm sorry, but I just find that confusing. I don't know if anybody else does, but maybe they're all smarter than me. Can you answer that one for me, please?
So, Through your worship, to Councillor Hannah. So I would just like to clarify. So a highway, generally within the township, is a provincial roadway, and most county roadways are often referred to in kind of slang terms as a highway. So those roads aren't our roadways, they're not our boulevards, so we're not actually allowed to regulate anything within those boulevards. So any roadway referred to within this bylaw can only be municipal roadways, so they're not technically highways. A boulevard, regardless of how deep the shoulder is a standard set width within any road allowance. Now, some are wider than others and some are narrower based off of just the age of the, the subdivision or the roadway. I believe, and perhaps our Director of Public Works can correct me, it's 31 feet from the center of the road to either side. 31, 33 feet from the center? 32, 30?
I think it's 33.
10 meters? From the center. So regardless of where the shoulder is, regardless of necessarily maybe where the grass or what the appearance of the front yard would be, the actual road allowance in the boulevard based off the Public Works measurement, and those measurements are available for us through county mapping services, so they would not be allowed to be within that boulevard.
Okay, so this is where we get the disconnect, because if you go back to your definition of a highway includes roadways. A highway includes everything from fence line to fence line, and a highway does include a municipal road. So I'm just suggesting that, I'm not trying to nitpick, but this is really confusing if you look at the details, because a highway is every road in our township, not just a provincial highway, with all due respect. So I'm just suggesting that maybe I should sit down with you and show you my concerns, and if that would help you, I'd be willing to do that. And just one last thing, if you read 2.2 where it says it has to be within, nothing can be within 3 meters of the edge of the township road, including the boulevard. Okay, so quickly flip over to, I think it's 2.6, is it? Where we talk about 2.6, no person shall place or attach or affix any sign or advertisement or device to a tree or utility pole. No person shall place or attach, affix any sign or advertisement device to any township land, roadway, boulevard, without receiving explicit permission to do so. Hold on here. I'm getting myself confused because it's still confusing to me. We talk about boards on sidewalks in municipalities. I'm just trying to find it. Maybe it's 4.4. Anybody else sees it, please tell me where you saw it.
It's 4.4, A-frame or sandwich board signs on sidewalks or storefronts in the Main Street areas.
So 4.4 says a frame or sandwich board sign placed on a sidewalk or storefront or Main Street areas are exempt from the regulations or this bylaw so long as they conform to the minimum distance, which is 3 meters, minimum distance set herein, and if they are placed so not to interfere with snow removal operation. The minimum distance is 3 meters or roughly 9-10 feet. So you can't have the edge of the roadway being 10 feet off the edge of the roadway and still be on a sidewalk. You'd be in the middle of the store. You agree?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
Okay, so anyway, I think we need to get together and chat about this sort of stuff, but I find it really confusing, and I think if we're going to generate a bylaw, we should do something that's not so confusing. Is that a polite way of putting it? I'll get in touch with you ladies whenever it's convenient and try to have time, but I only got a couple days to do so.
Deputy Mayor Allen, then Councilor McConkie.
Thank you, Mayor French. The types of signs that some communities have that they rent out, and the big signs that are right by the roads, how does that fit into this this potential bylaw?
So currently, I'm going to say most of those signs are probably placed within the boulevard. But that being said, most of those, like the hall boards and that kind of thing, would fall under the definition of community groups if that was so included within the bylaw, in which case they would still need to obtain a permit to ensure that they're following all the regulations. However, the fee would be waived. So they would have to follow the rules, but at no cost to them.
Follow on. And do you see the rules as they're in the bylaw as being restrictive from what they've been doing to this point in time?
I'm going to state that the bylaw department works off complaint basis for any infractions of signs. So if we haven't received a complaint about an existing sign, then it may be technically not permitted under the current bylaw.
Councilman Conkey?
That doesn't make me any happier saying that it's on a complaint basis, because it doesn't really, we have to work with our residents. And so when I hear about the sandwich signs and I think about the village of Elmvale and we want to make it, people go there and that, I like when I go down in Barrie downtown and I see the little sandwich board that tells me what the restaurant's having as their special for the day, and it actually draws me in. And I believe some of the ones in Elmvale will use those sandwich boards, but when I hear Councillor Hannah talking, who knows so much about distances and highways and that, I have concerns, because now it's saying 10 feet from the road. Well, you know that we have difficulty with that distance with our Elmvale stores. So listening to Councillor Hannah and listening to that, I think that we sort of have to revisit to see how do we make it work with our community, because I do not see anything wrong with a sandwich sign right beside the entrance of the door. Maybe it was wrong that we had our sidewalks too small, maybe, you know, to do this. So I think we have to sit back. And the other thing that the bylaw doesn't address, it says our fine. Well, is it necessary to give out a fine right away? I would like to see that we at least give a notice prior to giving a fine, especially when we haven't been forceful on it. I think that everyone deserves some type of notice before we slap a fine on them. And if, you know, there should be some type of process for that, and education prior to just slapping a fine. So I'd just like to see a little bit more detail on this and give us an example, like take some pictures in Elmvale and show us, are there infractions? Yeah, they haven't been reported, but all it takes is one bad neighbor to know this and start to reporting on you, and that's not what we want. We want to be able to ensure that we allow our businesses to go forward, encourage economic development, and I think that here we're sitting here putting money into signs because we say, oh yeah, that looks great to see the Springwater sign and encourage economic development, yet we're squashing what the value is to the businesses. So I want to see some examples to make sure that they will work. And because Councillor Hannah, he's brought out some details that I would never have thought of. So I just think we need a little bit more time before we go forward with it. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you to either the presenters or Director Spagnell. The definition, when I was hearing tonight about home-based businesses and signage, knowing that when Councillor Hannah was speaking to rural, does that then indicate that the businesses within more urban areas do not have the ability to place a sign in front of their business / home?
So currently, anyone who does, you're speaking specifically to home-based businesses, right? So currently, anyone who does have a home-based business is allowed to place a sign on the front of the building. It must be directly affixed to the front. It can't be hanging off the front. There's a minimum size distance, which is stated in the report. Sorry, I don't have the page open. It's quite small. So really, as you're driving past, you're not going to be able to see the sign, which is why we're amending it so we can allow that sign out front.
Which is consistent with our initiatives on every level where we want to encourage home-based businesses and bring it in. So that's why I think that was the confusion, is between the two different types of home-based business and the rural versus urban area. But the fact that we're now affording home-based businesses the ability to place signage where people are actually going to see it, which may then encourage more economic development through home-based business, is something that I fully support. And further to Councillor McConkey's comment about the slapping fines, I think that because it says that it's not shall, it's may, so that the discretion is there for bylaw. If bylaw wants to present them with a warning, that option is there, whereas if bylaw feels the need to present them with a fine at that time, that option is there as well. So I think that having that discretion because if it's a first-time offense versus a 12th time offense, I think that the wording needs to be as it is in order to allow bylaw the opportunity to do so.
Maybe I'll have basically our bylaw officer comment how we obviously enforce rather than, because opinions are great, but how do we do it?
Through your worship, we do inform, educate, and then our last resort would be enforce. So we would speak to the individuals, the property owners, or the business that has it out and ask them to, this is the regulations that we have, and ask them to fix it. And if it doesn't, then we would send a letter and give them a notice. And if it's still ongoing, then we may set a fine to them.
Councilor McConkey?
But stating it in the bylaw, I agree that that's your process. Somebody can leave, and that's what the process says. All you need is some bylaw officer that says, no, I'm going to give a fine. Like, I think if you're going to define a process, you define the process within the bylaw, and that it may. But I think that you do need to give notice. Like, that's the first process I think should be triggered, is education. But why don't we state it? Because otherwise it's left up to the judgment of the bylaw officer.
Karen?
Sorry, if I could just comment, I would like to comment, just going back to Councillor Hannah's comment, and then I'll comment on yours. Sorry, Councillor McConkey. I would just like to point out that the 3-meter setback is carried over from the previous bylaw, which has been in place since 2009. So if that's a distance we would like to change, that's certainly something that we can discuss later on. In regards to the enforcement of signs and making it mandatory, to say first you have to have a notice, and then second it's this fine, and third it's this fine, and this is like a very clear defined process. The issue with signs is someone could put a sign up in a roadway in Midhurst, and that would count as one sign. But then technically, if they take the sign down and then go put it up in Snow Valley, that technically is a brand new sign. If they do this throughout the entire township, knowing they're doing it in violation of our township because we gave them first warning in Midhurst, well, now we're going to have to give them first warning in Snow Valley, and then we're going to have to give them first warning in Elmville. So if they just keep moving their signs around, knowing they're doing it in violation, all we're doing is giving them notices and educating them without actually being able to fine them. So the way the bylaw is currently worded, that allows us and the bylaw officer the ability to make that discretion based off the circumstances, and if it's the same repeat offender versus it just being one random person with one random sign. That's why it was chosen to be worded. If council wishes for us to have a more formal process, that's fine, but that's the rationale behind that.
No, and quite honestly, typically with law enforcement, there's sometimes there isn't any warning, and because I'm not sure what the situation could be. I don't have any problem the enforcement part of it. I just wonder, maybe take some direction from the clerk, because we seem to be providing a lot of input. Maybe you can assist us moving this forward.
What I would recommend, if a member of council wishes, they could propose a motion to defer pending further council comment, and that would give an opportunity for council to further review, provide comments to staff, and a further report can be provided addressing those concerns or comments. There's not, this bylaw doesn't need to be approved at the next meeting. There is time to go through the process and to go through it to council's complete satisfaction.
Councillor McConkey?
I guess the only concern I have is the setback and what the implications are in Elmville for the community. So that's my concern, and I don't know how we deal with that, whether we all agree or, that it needs to be reduced, the amount of setback when you're in Elmville or something. I don't know.
And that's what they can kind of update in the report and see how we can deal with it. Councillor Hannah?
No, I accept your recommendation that we defer this because there are definitions that need to be in here that we talk about things that aren't explained in the definitions, like highways and, we'll set back, road allowance, roadway, all important comments I think that have to be added.
And since we've had good discussion, could I encourage everyone to kind of email the deputy clerk as soon as possible, because we've had good discussion and some ideas have come up that we didn't think of, and so they can come back with a more wholesome bylaw that addresses our needs and we can move forward. Because again, signs can be a problem everywhere, and you can have a lot of sign pollution, but we need to address the needs of small businesses and that at the same time, and Main Street, Elmville, or Hillsdale, or wherever the case may be. And one of the challenges, I guess, when you're doing setbacks from center of the road's a real problem in our township because we have lots of roads that are not in the center of the road allowance. So I don't know how you're going to deal with that. But anyway, you might have to add some language because I know that's occurred in a few situations. Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just further to deferring, if you will, if we can ask that we can maybe set a firm deadline of before the end of this month to receive comments from council so that we don't lose momentum on trying to get this bylaw moving forward. So some great work's being done, and I'd hate to see it kind of fall flat, if you will. So if we can try to do that, then it'd be much appreciated.
I think that would be very appropriate. I'm not sure we need to the end of the month because they'll forget to do it. So can I suggest that, no, I won't. I would suggest we kind of tighten the framework, and if you could provide input by February the 16th, which is a week this Friday, that would be appropriate. Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder to basically defer this? Hannah and Coughlin. That the motion now before council be deferred for further council comments with further reporting once comments are received. Should we put in the February 16th date so it's clear? No, those notes are made, but you might have some other ideas that we definitely would like to cover it. So we're just going to include the kind of the due date for the comments by February 16th. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you for the input. Okay, moving on now to cut and fill, and to get this on the table, can I have a mover and a seconder? McConkey, Hannah. And we'll be dealing with the report for the Director of Public Works regarding the adoption of the cut and fill bylaw be received and that the cut and fill bylaw be presented for consideration. Questions and comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. You did a great job there, Director of Public Works, with your cut and fill bylaw. Okay, now we're going on to some fire department items and breathing apparatus, and I need a mover and a seconder to get it on the table. Coughlin, Austin, just so you know what we are talking about. The report from Fire Chief Gavay regarding breathing apparatus replacement dated February 7th, 2018 be received. The Township of Springwater awards the supply of 16 complete self-contained breathing apparatus to M&L Supply through their leasing agent RCAP Leasing for a 60-month lease purchase agreement at a cost of $2,511.54 per month, which includes a $10 final payment, and the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the necessary agreements. So questions of Chief Gavay. Councillor Coughlin.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you to Chief Gavay. Just a question about repair and maintenance costs associated with the apparatus. Is that then borne to the municipality or to the actual owner?
Chief Gavay.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Coughlin. So anything covered by warranty would be at no cost to the municipality. However, anything not covered by the municipality would be covered by our SEBA repair program, which is a line item in our operating budget every year.
Yes, a follow-up to that, what kind of a warranty period is on this type of equipment?
Unfortunately, without internet access, I don't have a seat at the other table. I can't tell you that, but I can get back to you in a timely fashion.
Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, and I'm glad the chief doesn't have a gun. Chief, I read this report, and I understand and I agree that breathing apparatus is an important tool for our firefighters, and it's necessary. I have a couple issues with it, though. This comes post-budget. We're hearing about this post-budget, and it's $150,000. I guess I would have felt better if this had to come forward prior to our budget deliberations and decisions then on how we're going to spend our finances. I would suggest that council that while we approved 3 new vehicles for the fire service, this might be an opportunity to rethink purchasing those 3 fire vehicles. I'm sorry, not firefighting vehicles, or pickup trucks used for transportation generally. Keep the ones we have for a year and use the money that we'd spend on those trucks to buy this necessary, important firefighting equipment. I'm not sure you would be acceptable to that suggestion, but that's the suggestion I'm making mostly to council.
That's an interesting concept, and I think when we get to the trucks, we can talk about that. But I guess at the present time, if there's questions relative to the breathing apparatus replacement, let's focus on that for the moment. Is there any other questions?
Point of order. How, in light of this, the agenda is set, and the councillor asked to look at the other. I think that the pickup trucks were positioned in the agenda below. We could ask that the position of the pickup trucks be discussed prior to this apparatus, because they do go together, and we have to look at business as a whole. So I don't know how council can have a proper discussion without looking at both, because as Councillor Hannah said, this did not come forward at budget time. We were unaware of this expense. It's a large expense, but it is safety. We do need safety. We do not have a lot of additional money. I guess we have to go to our Director of Finance to find out about this money and that to make it more clear. But the two should, I don't think you can isolate the two, and I think we need to have the discussion together.
Take some, Director Schmidt first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to members of council. Just to clarify, so when the 2018 budget was put together, the operating budget for fire services does include the cost of the lease, the annual lease costs. So if council was to approve the leasing, then those costs are covered in the annual budget, annual operating budget. If council was to choose to not go with leasing and to want to pursue an outright purchase, that's a different conversation that we would have to find a funding source for. In addition to the fire trucks, those, as you know, are included in the capital budget as well. So it's really just a matter of, do you agree with the purchase, or do you not agree with the, do you agree with the purchase, outright purchase, or do you agree with the leasing, or do you not agree with either of those, I guess?
Okay, maybe some clarification on that. So the budget, we approved, the operating budget included the leasing costs. And so obviously, so the question here, would we, if we wanted to buy them, we'd have to find financing. But right now, there is no change to our operating budget by approving this equipment lease. Okay. Councillor Hannah?
I guess my question to finance or the chief is, if we lease these here, it's going to cost us $20,000 more than it would to buy them. Is that correct?
Director Gervais?
Thank you, Your Worship. So leasing is more expensive by $18,160.09, or $36.32 per year.
So basically, if I could convince the rest of the council that instead of buying these 3 trucks, we put the money towards buying these breathing apparatuses instead of leasing them, we would save our taxpayers almost $20,000. And I would strongly suggest that we consider that, because the breathing apparatus we need, the fire trucks we can make do with for 1 more year. And keeping in mind, we're only replacing 2 trucks. There's a 3rd truck that is an add-on that the fire department currently don't have.
Councillor Coghlan first.
Thank you, Mayor French. And just for clarification, the $20,000 is over the 60-month period. And also the replacement schedule that the fire department has, how would not replacing these vehicles that are in the next agenda item, how would that impact the entire fleet assessment, now knowing that we move vehicles through the public works into rec, into fire? How does not keeping up with the schedule that we've been moving forward with, how would that impact other departments and potentially the budgets moving forward?
Director Gavay.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Councillor Coghlan, so the 2003 two-wheel drive pickup brush truck that is currently located in Elmvale is slated to go to Recreation Parks and Properties. The 2007 Ford Expedition with 285,000 kilometers on it would just be retained, and that wouldn't affect anything. You just basically be making an alteration to the 6-year capital budget that you just approved.
Thank you. So as a follow-up, then, if we don't move a vehicle into fire, then down to parks, we can expect to see something from parks requesting a vehicle for parks, knowing that this vehicle from fire wouldn't be moving to them.
Director Gavay, or we can go to Director Belcourt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Coghlan, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on behalf of Recreation, Parks and Properties, but perhaps Director Belcourt would.
Director Belcourt.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Councillor Coghlan. The plan was to have the 2003 moved down to us for the summer months, and then it would be surplused in the fall. We have 2 replacement trucks slated in the next agenda item, of which would replace 2 of the older models. If we do not get the 2003, we would simply retain use of one of the 2 replacement vehicles until the fall, until we can surplus it. Although we haven't allowed for the additional expense of repairing these to keep them mobile until the fall, but that is something that we would have to incur.
Okay. Other questions? Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor French, through you. I had received information from Fire Chief Cavay and Director Schmidt today looking at the buying versus the leasing, and the difference of $18,160 is over the 5 years, as Chief has said. That equates to an annualized cost for the lease of about 5.8%. So I was saying, if we have funds internally to be able to finance that, then what's our opportunity cost? And it's that over the 5 years, or 5.8% on an annualized basis. And when you compare that to what we're getting for our investments, that's considerably more in interest. So that's another aspect to consider here. But Director Schmidt, is there the ability to internally finance, and would that put constraint on any of the reserves?
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Deputy Mayor Allen. So during the budget process of establishing the needs for the Fire Services Department and understanding all of the needs that were coming forward, one of the reasons why we also looked at a lease is because we didn't have the money in the fire reserve to be able to accommodate this. So we thought, hey, let's try to look at another option that may be available to us, and hence we looked at the lease. So I would say, if we're directly looking at the fire reserve funds, no. However, there are other reserves, tax rate stabilization and or working funds reserve that could be utilized to offset this outright purchase if council so chooses. So those 2 items, or those 2 reserves, could be utilized, but again, at council's discretion. So.
Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, and I don't want to be whipping a dead horse here, but I think the simple, most responsible thing to do is postpone the purchase of 3 trucks, buy the necessary firefighting equipment for the safety of the fire personnel. And keeping in mind, and it's not the chief's fault, but we have had 3 new trucks for the fire chief in Springwater Township in the last 5 years. And I know they get moved down the line, but our taxpayers don't necessarily see that as being as important an issue as maybe the fire service I'm not trying to criticize, I'm just saying from a responsible financial position, we should get the fire breathing apparatuses and postpone the purchase of the trucks. And that's going to be my position when it comes to vote for this.
I appreciate the comments, and I guess we'll find out where it goes. I guess one of the things that concerns me is that, you know, these items were in budgets. The budgets were approved at the particular time, and yes, we do approve expenditures as they show up. But I guess, you know, we can kind of revisit everything, and I'm very dependent on kind of the expert recommendations that come from our experts. I try not to second guess them from time to time, but anyway, I guess we'll kind of, we have a resolution here. Yeah, so I'll go to Councillor Austin first.
Thank you, Mayor French. I was listening as carefully as I could to Deputy Mayor Allen, and he was throwing some numbers and percentages around, but I didn't fully understand what conclusion you came to at the end of the answers to COSO. So if you could summarize for me what your conclusion was, Deputy Mayor Allen, having heard the answers.
I wonder if we should ask Director Schmidt to clarify what, because of the savings and where the money would come from, and the conclusion comes, no, the conclusion comes back to council, whether we want to save this $18,000. Well, I guess it wouldn't really be that because we are borrowing it, so it's not 5%, but it's something. And I just, maybe you could provide us some guidance on what's the real dollar difference if we purchased today and borrowed it internally, or leased it out at its 5%, Deputy Mayor Allen has calculated that. But what would be the real net saving to the taxpayer? Give or take a few $1,000s. I'll go to Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to members of council. I haven't quite done that analysis, but I think, you know, to the Deputy Mayor's comments, at a high level, if council chooses to purchase outright, essentially you're going to save $18,000 over 5 years. You won't have to pay that in interest, if you will. So we do have, with that said, we do have money set aside, approximately $35,000, I think, give or take, in the fire services annual operating budget for the lease component of this. So if council was to go ahead and outright purchase, we would have to look at, obviously, the difference of about $115,000, or actually, I can't remember what the actual purchase price is, around $130,000, I think was. Purchase price, so you're looking at about just under $100,000 that we would have to find out of a reserve, if you will, to offset the offset the purchase price, if you chose to outright purchase this instead of forgo the lease. And as I mentioned, funds that are available, you could look at the tax rate stabilization. Those funds have been set aside to assist with smoothing tax increases in future years. So it is surplus funds that have been generated from previous years. We also have working funds, which essentially is the same thing as tax rate, but they're just different reserves right now, that's all. So you do have that option to draw on those two funds if you wish, if you choose to outright purchase these items. Again, the way we looked at it is based on all of the needs of the fire services department over the next few years, and if you look at the 6-year capital plan, there are some significant requirements in our fire services, and hence the fire reserve will be tapped into very quickly over the next couple of years. So that reserve is not available at this stage, unless you take the option that Councillor Hanna has brought forward and potentially move some of those capital items around, whether it be not purchase those vehicles, and or I believe there's another item in the 2018 capital budget with regards to radios, and again, that would be more the fire chief's comments as to the need on those. Not sure I answered your question, Mr. Mayor.
We'll go to Deputy Mayor's,
Thank you,
I guess
Mayor
explanation on
French.
that.
The 5.8% was actually a figure that Director Schmidt gave me, because I said, what's the imputed rate of interest on the lease? In other words, what are we effectively paying in an interest rate to pay an extra $18,160 over 5 years? And that's an imputed annualized cost of that lease of 5.8%. So you're paying 5.8% interest to be able to have that lease, to not be able to tap a reserve that we do have, not necessarily the fire reserve, but we do have the ability to internally finance. So it just, you always have to question, does it make sense to be paying an external party the interest when you've got the money from somewhere to internally finance? That was what I was trying to get at.
Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. And my questions are more to the apparatus was a two-part, so it's the face piece and the cylinder, from what I understand. Is that correct? Through you, Mayor French.
Director Gavet.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Coghlan. So it's I believe the official term is a backplate assembly, which is kind of the big plastic part with all the electric stuff attached to it. Then you have the cylinder that provides the air, and then the face piece that each individual wearer has.
Okay, and forgive me, through you, Mayor French. So as each individual firefighter comes on, each person has their own face piece. So if there's turnover or new training or new hires, the face piece would then be assigned to the new hire as well?
Director Gavet.
Thank you, Worship. To Councillor Coghlan, you're absolutely right. So long as the face piece is in good working order and you can see through it, it certainly would be reassigned as opposed to buying a new one.
Oh, okay. The other question I had, in the report it states that some of the equipment that we're dealing with right now is over 30 years old, and that it's a 5-year life cycle on or a 5-year life cycle is anticipated for it. So do we need to replace all 16 today, or are there some, because it says by 2018, so is that at the end of the year? Like, could we purchase some now and some later? I'm just looking at listening to the rest of council to find ways to make sure that this does go forward and it does happen. I'm just curious about, do we need it all today, or is every single piece that we have expired?
Director Gavet.
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Coghlan. So we actually have 46 breathing apparatus within the township. 16 I've been advised need to be replaced in 2018. They wouldn't all need to be replaced necessarily. You could phase it in throughout the year. However, there's exchange rate risk. These products are manufactured in the States, so it depends on the cost of the fluctuation in the exchange rate, and any markups that may change throughout the industry and our suppliers at the time. So you couldn't take today's figures and say that that would be your overall 2018 phase through cost.
Thank you. So, and last point, so the 16 that we're replacing now, we can anticipate to be doing this again next year and the next year after, and this is just common practice then, to ensure that the equipment that the firefighters we have is up to date and ready to go. It's just a question of how we're financing it.
Director Gavet.
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Coghlan. So basically, it's anticipated that the life of these, if they're well maintained and not abused, is going to be 20 years. For the back plate assembly, the masks around 5, depending on where, and the cylinders where they're carbon fibre actually have a life cycle of 15 years. And if you refer to page 4 of my staff report, you'll see the replacement schedule that actually says how many packs we'll actually need between now and 2037. And it should be noted that it's not normal in a department our size to be replacing this many at one time, but I guess we took advantage of some second-hand deals from other fire departments who were replacing in past years, and bought a large number that were due to expire in this particular year, and that's why you're replacing 16 at a time, not say 4 or 5.
Councillor McConkey.
I'm just wondering, what do other fire departments do? Is this leasing quite common, or do most people purchase outright? Because sometimes I like to own rather than lease. So I just wondered if you've done some research on other fire departments and volunteers.
Director Gavet.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Councillor McConkey. So it really depends on the municipality. Some municipalities do like to lease. In our case, we own the equipment after 5 years. So you're basically paying for it over 5 years with a $10 final payment, and then it's yours, for the rest of its life cycle, which is up to 20 years. On the East Coast, for instance, where I came from last, there's not a lot of leasing that occurs. I would say it's probably the exception rather than the norm. However, it seems the further west you travel, the more likely you are to find departments that lease, just to be creative with their finances.
Other questions? Okay, so where do we go with this resolution? We have it on the table with Coghlan and Austin. Councillor Hanna.
I'd like to consider making a motion to eliminate the purchase of the 3 fire trucks and use the money to buy the breathing apparatus that is an important issue for our fire service.
I'll take some guidance with from the clerk, but we have a motion on the table.
Because the motion on the table is dealing with the breathing apparatus, that's the only thing that can be dealt with. An amendment can be made to this motion. As it stands right now, this motion approves a lease agreement. There could be an amendment to purchase outright or whatnot, but it has to deal with the breathing apparatus only. The next item would be dealing with the vehicle purchase.
So I guess I need your guidance on how to, the mechanics of getting this done. And you know what I'm trying to get done, so I just need your guidance on how to make a motion to get to pay for this apparatus in lieu of buying 3 new fire trucks, or 3 new fire pickup trucks.
Madam Clerk.
By actually just doing what you did, by debating to council and providing your feedback on what you would like to do, stating that you would like this to be approved pending consideration on the next item. That's the only way to do it. We cannot incorporate that next item into this motion.
So, but this could be, because right now it is a lease agreement. If there's a desire to change it to a purchase. Director Schmidt, maybe you can provide some guidance. Okay, I'll go to the clerk, and then there's a couple of questions over here too. Madam Clerk?
Okay, so another option is that this item can be deferred and then brought back later on in the meeting. This item gets deferred, the next item gets put onto the, gets tabled, full discussion on that item, and then this item can come back.
Okay, so, well, yeah, let's finish off our questions, and then if the mover and seconder are agreeable to table it, makes it easier. But anyway, Deputy Mayor Allen, do you have a comment or question before I go to Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Mayor French. No, I just wanted to address the lease versus buy, but I'll wait until after the next topic.
Councillor Ritchie?
Mayor French, I just wanted to ask the chief, like, in regards to the purchase, whether we purchase, whether we lease, is there any savings, like, when we're using these apparatuses, if we lease them, like, something goes wrong, do they automatically fix that, or is it the same whether we purchase it, we still have to pay? Is there any savings there? Because that's something we've never brought up.
Director Gavay?
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Ritchie. So, not really. Basically, there's a warranty that will come with the equipment, provided that any repair or maintenance is required and covered by warranty. They'll be at no cost to us. However, if it's not covered by the warranty, you have to pay for it regardless of whether you're leasing it or whether you buy it.
Regardless of it's a lease. I did read this report too, by the way. Thank you.
Okay, other comments before we table it? Okay, Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French, and I guess maybe through you to Director Schmidt. The only question I have is how we pay for it, whether or not this goes through. I think that is something that this entire council supports. So I think tonight it's basically, are we going to lease it or are we going to pay for it up front? So when the recommendation came to council to lease it, can I have some more information as to why we chose that? It was simply just because the fire reserve was drained for Parks and or Public Works expansion, I'm assuming, or renovation, I'm assuming. So the money's not in fire in order to pay for it. So we either internally borrow or we finance. So as far as deferring to talk about trucks, to me, trucks have no implication on whether or not this is approved by council. So I don't see the point in deferring this. I would like to know council's opinion on how we're going to pay for it, because I think we all agree that this needs to happen. Interesting to Deputy Allen's point of if we can save taxpayers money by internally borrowing the money, I think that we should do it. At the end of the day, the firefighters still get their apparatus. So if we can save taxpayers some money and get the apparatus, it's some avenue I'd like to look at.
Okay, unless there's something new, because I think those are appropriate questions to decide if we're going to lease or buy when we kind of bring this back onto the table. But Councillor McConkey?
Okay, so we are agreeing to bring it back on the table after, okay.
Well, I'm not sure. Okay, right now, does the
I would
mover and
support that
seconder,
motion.
does the mover and seconder agree to table it, and then we'll bring it back after we talk about the trucks?
And who was the mover and seconder?
Who were they? Coghlan and Austin. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. I just want to be very clear that that's fine. We can just go straight to a vote and have a seconder and vote to it. But whether or not we purchase trucks should not impede on whether or not we purchase this apparatus for our volunteer firefighters. It's simply how we finance it. So whether we defer this until after or not, we've heard council's opinion that we are spending a lot of money on fire right now, and it may not be the most responsible thing to purchase 3 trucks versus 2. That is the next item on the agenda. I think we need to move forward with this decision and debate how we're going to pay for it. But in my opinion, to suggest that trucks impede this, I don't see that. We hear it often that we're responsible for the finances, and I understand that. But this needs to happen. We just need to figure out how.
No, and I think it's going to be easier for council to make a decision if we reverse the order. I think that's all we're doing. And so I'm just asking a question. If you know, if you don't want to move the tabling, pardon? Sorry, no, I'm asking. So you will not move to table? No. Okay. So I need a mover. You're still fine with seconding it?
I would second deferring it.
Yeah.
Deferring it, so discuss.
Tabling means we're going to deal with it tonight. That's what it means.
Well, yeah, yeah.
No, that's what I'm just saying. To be clear, we're not deferring it to another
I'm quite happy
meeting.
with, talk about the trucks and then come
Yeah.
back and talk about the breathing apparatus.
And that's the idea, and that was
Yeah,
a very
I'm
good
okay
suggestion
with that.
from Director Schmidt. So, to table it, can I have well, Councillor Austin, will you move the tabling, please, and can I have a seconder?
Yes.
Councillor Hanna. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so we've tabled that, and now we'll move on to the next item. And to be clear what that is, I need a mover and a seconder to get it on the table. Coghlan, and a seconder, Hanna. That the report from the Fire Chief Gavay and the Director of Recreation Parks and Properties regarding the award of 5 pickup trucks dated February 7, 2018 be received. The Township of Springwater awards the supply of 2 4-wheel drive, full-size 6-foot and 6-foot plus box, extended cab, half-ton pickups trucks for recreation parks and properties, and 3 4-wheel drive, full-size 6-foot plus box, full crew cab, 4-door, 3/4-ton pickups to Tom Smith in the amount of $175,656.44 after tax rebates. Okay, the floor is open on now, and maybe I'll start with Councillor Hanna.
My suggestion is, instead of buying 3 trucks for the fire service, we replace the 2 that need replacing. We postpone buying the additional, use the money towards buying the breathing apparatus, which I agree and support, we need to get it, and then we take the additional money out of reserves to pay for the breathing apparatus. So my position is 2 trucks for the fire, not 3.
Okay, and obviously, Chief Gavay, how would that work out in your scheme of things, and what would the impact be?
Thank you, Worship. So the additional vehicle that I think Councillor Hanna is alluding to would be the one that was proposed, the net new vehicle, that was proposed that the Division Chief of Fire Prevention and the Training Officer would share. It'll just mean that the truck that's normally assigned to Station 3 for towing the ATV, etc., will have to be used by those individuals until such time as a truck is freed up. So it's workable.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor French, can you give us an indication then, if in that scenario, what the dollar savings would be?
Actually, that's a good question, and I'm just curious, when we went out for tender, is this going to have to be re-tendered because it was a bulk purchase, or maybe someone can tell me what the situation might be if we take one vehicle out of the mix? Okay, Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try. I guess the option would be is to go back to the lowest bidder and negotiate and see if they're willing to offer the same pricing if it's only for the 4 vehicles.
Okay, no, that's appropriate. Director Gavay?
Thank you, Worship. Just looking at the submission from the lowest compliant tender for both projects, on the base truck itself, the savings would be $36,055.
Okay, about 36,000 saving. Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to members of council. So that's the savings on if you don't purchase the vehicle, but the budget, capital budget, included an amount of $57,500 for the purchase of the vehicle to be funded out of the fire reserve. So you're looking at $57,500 would essentially be directed towards the purchase of the breathing apparatus if you so choose to go that path.
Thank you. Councillor Hanna.
Yeah, because I think it's important to remember that the chief could probably give us an estimate, but on top of buying the vehicle, we have to paint it, equip it, and put our logos on it and all that stuff, and I guess that's why it's $57,000, right?
Director Gavay?
Yeah, absolutely. The pricing I gave you was related to the question specific to deleting a truck from the bid, and Director Schmidt is entirely correct with the capital budget request overall, which relates to the items that Councillor Hanna just mentioned.
Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor French. So can you please then repeat the potential scenario between yourself, fire, and recreation about if there was a deferral, and it's not a cancellation, I believe it's a deferral, then what would roll out for us when this would happen, and how would it impact fire and how would it impact recreation?
Director Gavay, I know you addressed part of it. I'm not sure what the roll-on effect would be to Director Belcourt, but maybe repeat about the sharing and the comments you did make, and then we'll go to Director Belcourt.
Perfect, thank you, Worship. So the intent was for the Division Chief of Fire Prevention and the Training Officer to share a vehicle because it was felt at the time of the budget presentation that there wasn't enough to justify a truck each for them. So basically, if one truck is eliminated from this process, that would be the truck that would be impacted. So basically, with the day staff being split in many different directions, you know, myself going one way, the deputy chief often going another way, and then either the division chief or the training officer taking the vehicle that is currently assigned to tow the ATV trailer and all the other trailers that we have for training or incident command. There is a risk, albeit relatively small, that you know, we're all off out in separate directions across a fairly large township, and a call comes in for the ATV, but there's going to be no vehicle there to tow it. It's a smallish risk. so I feel somewhat comfortable with it. Then obviously it's up to council as to how it amends a 6-year capital plan to either put that vehicle back in future years, or just to eliminate it altogether.
Director Belcourt, do you have any carry-on effect?
Thank you, Worship. It won't have a huge effect on us as we just utilize some of the surplus vehicles for the summer months to students, which just means we'll keep one of the ones that is in a little worse shape than the one fire and emergency was going to get rid of for the summer months for use by the students.
Okay. Councillor Hanna?
Yeah, and I think as the chief and Mr. Belcourt has explained, this is the additional truck. This isn't the trucks that's going to be handed down to Parks and Rec. This is the additional truck that we're not getting. We don't currently have it. The fire service manages now without it. We're just deferring it for a year and using the money in a more appropriate way.
No, I think we've had a very, very good discussion on it. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. I'd like to reiterate Councillor Hanna's point that in the amendment to the motion that it is deferred to 2019 rather than being removed from the budget, so that we are sure that it's part of the capital portion brought forward to, I guess, next council.
I'm sure it'll show up in next year's budget. Deputy Mayor Allen.
So I hear what you say. So why was it so important to have it included in the budget that we discussed and initially approved in the budget? If I'm hearing that it can easily be deferred a year and it could potentially be deferred into, well, not included as an additional truck. I guess I'm sort of hearing a different, I'm perceiving a different need for it now than I perceived at budget time.
Director Gavay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Easy is certainly not a word that I would choose to describe it. It can be done. We're moving towards a more proactive fire prevention model that we've had in the past. Basically, the existing policy or departmental policy has been to do fire and life safety inspections upon complaint and request, which is a bare minimum standard, and I do mean bare minimum standard imposed by the province. And I don't think it really is a good service for the citizens of Springwater. I do believe that, we have a full-time fire prevention officer. That full-time fire prevention officer should be out and about in the community, making sure that businesses and assembly occupancies that we have throughout the township are, up to code, and therefore for safer people to patronise. And obviously this vehicle would certainly help him get out and do that as we transition into this new, more progressive model that actually meets the province's guidelines for how it responds to fire risk, with prevention being the preferred #1 activity. Like I say, we can do it. There are some risks to it. I think the issues that we have are, particularly around scheduling, that very often the training officer is expected to be at the township or somewhere else providing training, but the fire prevention officer also needs to be somewhere else. And, myself and the deputy chief try to carpool as much as possible. In fact, we did it today, so that we can leave trucks available. However, there is a shortage now. It's not going to get any worse by deferring it for a year, but it can be done, I guess. I respect where council is going with their breathing apparatus. I think, it is the highest priority, and I certainly support and respect the reasoning behind looking at deleting a truck. In an ideal world, I'd stick with my recommendation, and I'm very comfortable with my job as a fire chief that, I recommend, and then council has to make tough decisions based on the recommendations and the resources that it has. So yes, we can, continue to, feel some pinches along the way and take some small risks, but it's doable for the next 12 months.
Thank you. That was a good explanation. So if we did defer the one truck, then that would get us approximately $57,000 plus. I understand there's $35,000 in the reserve, so it's $90,000. Director Schmidt, how much is in the, not the fire reserve, but the other reserve, the contingency reserve? I don't know, it's not called that, but it's the tax stabilization.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Deputy Mayor Allen. It's approximately $375,000 in the tax rate stabilization reserve. So to clarify, you have about $57,500 from if you would defer the one vehicle, You have 35 in the operating budget, so you have 92.5. You need approximately another 37.5 to come out of this reserve and/or another reserve, but there is 375,000 in the tax rate stabilization reserve.
So if we did for the breathing apparatus, the $35,000, that would leave us about $120,000. The cost to buy these, was it 130 or 150? 130. So it'd be $100,000 that we'd have to come up with other internal financing.
No, I think, Director Schmidt, do you want to go through that again?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So assuming that council was to defer the new vehicle, which would give you essentially $57,500 from the fire reserve, there is an additional $35,000 already in the operating budget, so essentially $92,500. Then you would essentially need the difference between the $130,000 purchase price and $92,500, which is approximately $37,500.
Yes, I understood that, but if we did not do the deferral of the trucks and went with our original budget approval, then of the $130,000 for the breathing apparatus, we could come up out of fire reserve for about 30 of it, and that would leave $100,000 to find elsewhere in the reserve. That's what I was asking before. That's the scenario I'm going to be supporting, because I think we've reviewed the trucks. I think it's necessary to have the trucks. It certainly is necessary to have the breathing apparatus. We have the ability to internally finance this, so we don't need to be spending the extra $18,000 over 5 years. And I think we should drive on with both. That's what I'll be trying to get approved.
Councillor McConkey.
I think we go into our reserves a little too freely. Tonight we saw the building department say to us, building's going to be slowing down. There's going to be a slowdown for the next couple of years. So we've got a very aggressive budget. And the more we keep going into these reserves that we really don't have in the department that needs it, I don't know if I'm very comfortable with that. So that's all I can say.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. So we have a motion that includes all the vehicles on the table. Moved by Coggan, second by Hannah. Sorry? Yes. Yes, he did. Yeah, he's
still voting against it.
Yeah, you know, he can still vote against it. Yeah, that's not the issue. But is someone proposing an amendment? Okay, Councillor Hannah.
Yes, no, my amendment will be that we replace the 2 trucks that we need, but we don't buy the 3rd additional truck and save the $57,000.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor McConkey.
And just for clarification, earlier you had mentioned about a deferral to the 2019 capital program. Is that part of your amendment as well?
You mean, so we buy the additional truck that's an add-on to the fleet this year? You're asking me if I'm going to approve it for 2019?
If that's part of your amendment, as you mentioned earlier.
Go ahead and put that in there. I don't know, that'll be up to the next council whether they approve it, but it's subject to the wording.
No, but just for
yeah, the wording's in there, yes, but I'm just saying I can't commit the future council.
So for that, what we would need to do to have that amendment put on the table is that the motion now before council be amended as follows, that the award of 5 vehicles be amended to 4 vehicles, and that 3 4-wheel drive be amended to 2 4-wheel drive, and that the 2019 capital budget be amended to add the purchase of a 4-wheel drive 3/4 ton pickup truck for the fire department.
So are we clear on that? Because that represents the 57,000 plus the operating of 35 or whatever it is.
I need a recorded vote too, please, Mayor.
Okay. So just so everybody's clear, we're voting on the amendment first, and then we go back to the main motion as amended or the way it was.
A recorded vote was requested by Councillor Hannah. Once I state your name, please state yes or no. Councillor Austin?
No.
Councillor Coghlan?
No.
Councillor Hannah?
Yes.
Councillor McConkey?
Yes.
Councillor Ritchie?
No.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
No.
Mayor French?
Yes. Yes.
The amendment is lost.
Okay, so we go back to the main motion, which has all the vehicles in it, originally moved by Councillor Coghlan, and I don't think Councillor Hannah wants to, do you want to still second it? I guess you can still, no, you can still second it and vote against it.
Okay, I got broad shoulders. Yes, I'll second
No,
it.
no, okay. No, I just want to be clear, because that's the way we have it. So we will deal with that motion now. Okay,
Recorded vote.
oh, okay.
A recorded vote was requested by Councillor McConkey. Once I state your name, please state yes or no. And this is back to the main motion as is. Councillor Austin?
Yes.
Councillor Coghlan?
Yes.
Councillor Hannah?
No.
Councillor McConkey?
No.
Councillor Ritchie?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Yes.
And Mayor French?
No,
The motion is carried.
the motion is carried. Great. Okay, now we can move on to, or back up to the motion that we tabled. So the discussion now most likely is lease or replacement, and it appears to be going in the replacement, and the mover was Coghlan, seconder was Austin on that. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. I'd like to add an amendment to the motion as it stands that it be financed internally. Sole purchase and financed internally.
That would be enough direction, Director Schmidt?
To say.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council, preference would be to provide direction to staff as to how you would like that to be financed internally, as in which reserve you would like it to be drawn out of.
Okay, so a little more detail in the amendment would be appropriate. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor French. And these discussions were brought up when the money from fire was lent to proceed with the renovation. We did understand that we were draining this and it could potentially place implications on for future purchases through fire. I don't know off the top of my head the current balances in the working group fund or the tax stabilization rate fund. I'm also not aware entirely of all the different reserves. I don't know if Public Works has some money that they want to give back or not, but I can't advise as to how it is. Maybe it does need to be deferred and you can present another option to council, but I think this council would like to look as to how it can be internally financed.
Councillor McConkey?
That's my problem here. This council is making a decision and they really don't know where they're taking the money from. We know that we've used recreation funds to help with the fire hall, I believe. Well, there's been funds from recreation taken from the reserve. I'll have Director Schmidt go forward, but I think Public Works had to use fire. There's been other departments using fire, so maybe recreation has a lot of money in it since we seem to go with things for recreation. Maybe you could borrow some money from there. Or do we even have any reserves in these ones that we have been collecting for?
Actually, before we go too far down the road, I think Deputy Mayor Allen was having some discussion with our director and where monies would come from. And maybe you would like to kind of repeat that comment and the funds where
Yeah, through you, Mayor
bought
French.
everything.
as I understood it before, there's approximately 35,000 left in the fire reserve fund. There's 300 and some odd thousand left in the tax stabilization fund. So my recommendation would be to use the fire reserve fund to the extent it is there and take the rest of the monies from the tax stabilization fund. But I do agree with the other councillors. Director Schmidt, we look to you for what makes most sense in other reserves to help out to purchase this breathing apparatus.
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council, essentially the proposal to fund from the tax rate stabilization reserve is probably the most appropriate. That is surplus funds that have been generated from prior years. So that would be probably the most appropriate. I wouldn't suggest that you would venture into other reserves because those monies have been set aside for specific purposes for those key areas or departments, if you will. So the tax rate stabilization reserve is essentially monies sitting there from previous years that have not been identified for any specific purpose at this stage. So those would be appropriate to utilize for this purchase.
Councillor Hanna?
Thank you. My observation is that our Director of Finance recommended leasing versus internal financing. So I would like to know why he went with leasing, and I respect his decisions generally, so he must have had a good idea.
Yeah. Director Schmidt, you can kind of repeat your argument on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to members of council, Councillor Hanna. So essentially, when we looked at developing the budgets for 2018, we took a look at all of the needs, both capital and operating, for the Fire Services Department. And due to, if you look at the 6-year capital plan, or you may recall that there are some significant purchases that are going to be, or planned to be made over the next 6 years for fire services, hence draining essentially the fire reserve. So in order to ensure that those items were actually accounted for and being purchased, in addition to the breathing apparatus, the idea is that in order to minimize the impact on the annual operating budget, we would take a look at the leasing option so that you don't have a huge spike in 1 year, in a given year. So we were able to essentially smooth the operating budget, and we put money in the annual operating budget for the next 5 years to cover the lease costs. That's essentially the process we walk through, is trying to minimize the impact on an annual basis. And yes, there is an additional cost to do so, as has been mentioned this evening. That is the cost-benefit analysis, if you will. It will cost a little bit more to lease, but it will also allow the Fire Services Department to move forward with the plan that currently Council has approved through the 2018 process.
Thank you. I think the clerk is getting some clarification. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you. The clarification I have is for Director Schmidt, so I can wait. French. Thank you, Mayor French. And through you to Director Schmidt, the working group fund, how is that different than this tax stabilization rate, just for my own knowledge?
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. You may recall that we had some discussions when we were doing the long-range financial plan with our consultants, Hempson. The working fund is a fund essentially that has been, that was created well before my time. And so essentially the working fund and the tax rate stabilization, as we come forward in 2018 with our financial policies, we will likely be requesting to merge those two. And I think that was part of the conversation we had with Hempson at the time, is to merge those two reserves. So right now, it's really just more of an administrative thing where they're separated. We need to we would likely recommend that they merge together. It's essentially the same thing. It's surplus funds over the last number of years have gone into those reserves, and to the extent that the township was ever in a deficit position, then those would be the first funds that we would likely try to tap into.
Thank you. And just so we're clear to the residents at home, the overall, I understand that there's many areas that, or many reserves that are allocated already, but we're not draining reserves. It's 38, how many millions are in reserves overall?
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So including all of our reserve and reserve funds, so development charges and such, we're approximately $33 million.
So, and I think that that's to Deputy Allen's point. If we have the ability to internally finance something, I think that we need to do that. I don't think that taking on additional debt, knowing that this is something I appreciate bringing it forward to in council in a way that wouldn't impact a budget. I can understand why staff would bring that to us, and I do appreciate that. But I think that this council, I think I support moving forward internally financing it, and I would like to just continue to move that.
Deputy Mayor Allen.
Director Schmidt, can I pose an analogy and you tell me if I'm correct or not? If I had a home that had equity in it, and I got a home equity line of credit for $100,000, and the interest rate that I had to pay on that if I borrowed was 5.8%, and yet I had portfolio assets of a lot more than that. That I could borrow, I could reduce and use because I was only making 1 to 2% on those. Wouldn't it make more sense to draw down and borrow against those assets that I'm just making 1 to 2% versus borrowing against my home equity line of credit and having to pay interest of 5.8%?
I think we're looking for financial advice here, Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Deputy Mayor Allen. I would agree with you in that particular scenario that it would be best to essentially, what you're suggesting here is the internal finance. Yeah, that is an option, and hence why it's in front of you this evening. Again, when we were walking through the process of developing the capital and operating budgets, the tax rate stabilization reserve is not necessarily portioned directly to fire. And so it is what we're doing here tonight, allowing council to decide as to how you want to utilize those funds. So I'll leave it in council's hands as to how you want to move forward with this.
This may not be a fair question, but you're the one charged with kind of our reserves and paying the bills and finding places to place various funds. Obviously, you looked at the entire picture at some point and suggested, yes, it'll cost more money, but for smoothing or impact on various funds, would you prefer the lease approach over the kind of the asset purchased and kind of moving monies around that we're suggesting now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council, I'll go back to my comment of the way the 2018 operating and capital budgets were proposed, I think indicates the position that I took at that time.
Thank you, that's clear. Good. Okay, so I think we need an amendment here, and Madam Clerk.
I need a seconder for that first, correct? I need a seconder for the amendment.
And this is to change it to a purchase and with funds coming from a variety of sources. Yes, Madam Clerk.
I'll read the amendment, that the motion now before council be amended as follows. Replace the second and third paragraphs with that the Township of Springwater awards the supply of 16 complete self-contained breathing apparatus to M&L Supply at a cost of $130,537.60, and add paragraph, and that the purchase be internally financed through the tax rate stabilization reserve.
Yeah, I think
and we
both,
can say
yeah.
fire and tax.
Okay, so that's the amendment proposed. Yeah, we need a seconder, sorry. Deputy Mayor Allen? And of course, if this succeeds, then it'll become part of the main motion as amended. So do you need clerk to read that again? No, okay. So all those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? That is carried. And now I'll have the clerk read the motion as amended.
The motion as amended would read that the report from Fire Chief Gavet regarding breathing apparatus replacement dated February 7th, 2018 be received, and that the Township of Springwater awards the supply of 16 complete self-contained breathing apparatus to M&L Supply at a cost of $130,537.60, and that the purchase be internally financed through the Tax Rate Stabilization Reserve and Fire Reserve.
Okay, so all those in favor of that motion? Opposed? That is carried. Can we have about a 5 to 7 minute comfort break? Thank you, Director Gavet. This meeting. And the first item is the kind of the Clean Water and Wastewater Fund transfer payment agreement. So going to have a mover and a seconder to get that on the table. Austin and McConkey. And I'll read the resolution. The report from the Director of Finance regarding Clean Water and Wastewater Fund Ontario amended transfer payment agreement dated February 7th, 2018 be received. The mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the necessary agreement. Need any clarification from the Director of Finance? Okay, don't think so. Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And next it is the meeting schedule. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that one change? Hannah and Coughlin. That the report from the clerk regarding the amendment to council meeting schedule February 21st, 2018, regular meeting of council start time, dated February 7th, 2018, be received, and that in accordance with S43 of bylaw 2017-007 procedural bylaw, council hereby amends the 2018 regular meeting schedule as follows. Regular meeting February 21st, 2018, 5 p.m. start time. All those in favor? Carried. And the next one is something, I know it's in the budget, but it's the actual kind of the approval of the Barrie area physician recruitment. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Hannah? Richie? The report from the clerk regarding the Barrie area physician recruitment request for contribution dated February 7, 2018 be received. The council approves the contribution request for 2017-2018 fiscal year in the amount of $8,000, and the contribution be funded through the proceeds of the Springwater Swing Golf Tournament. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, do you have some discussion or question? Councillor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor French. Just the question, conversation earlier about delegations requesting the money. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, and I'll follow up on that. We always get one from Barrie, but Midland, and I just talked to Councillor Ritchie because he's on the Midland. We haven't had one from them for a long time. And so they're going to come down too, because we did send $11,000 some dollars aside for both of them, but we hadn't heard from the Midland. And Councillor Ritchie is going to ask the person up there to come and present, because we usually get an annual one from the Barrie physician recruitment. And we had one some time ago. So this is the actual payment.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Okay, public holiday schedule. Can I have a mover and a second to get this on the table? Hannah? Austin? The report from the Manager of Human Resources regarding 2018 public holiday and year-end holiday office closure dated February 7, 2018 be received, and that the 2018 year-end holiday office closure schedule as outlined in the subject report be approved. Any questions on that? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, information reports. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Hannah Coughlin. The reports items 14.2 through to 14.5 be received as information. Do you want to pull any of these or have a discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Verbal reports. Official plan, any updates? Director Spagno?
Thank you, Mayor French. I'd just like to thank council for taking the time to meet with staff to discuss the discussion paper, the growth management strategy. There was a lot of good comments and a lot of good feedback received, so staff will be taking those back for consideration and be looking to roll out those documents to the agencies for further review and comment. Thank you.
And do you have anything further on economic development updates while you have the floor?
Not at this point, Mayor French, thank you.
Maybe I'll go to Deputy Mayor Allen. I wasn't at the last county meeting, so is there anything new and exciting?
Well, it wasn't, the Greenbelt was discussed in the county recommendations set out in their report were voted on. I questioned whether they should wait until after these meetings, but the initial responses of the staff were voted to be submitted, and they've indicated that there'll be further comments that they're going to be putting forward to county to submit further comments by March 7th. The next, there wasn't much else because we were low on quorum because of the conference that was going on, or we had quorum, but just barely. The February 13th meeting next week, there are a number of items with respect to waste management. Simcoe Transit implementation project update is happening. Curbside battery collection is report in there reviewing that. Update on the amended Blue Box program plan. Update on the food and organic waste framework, and a proposed tire regulation. All are going to be discussed next Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Municipal updates. Anybody have anything that they'd like to share with us? Councillor Hanna, start there.
Just a last reminder, Family Day, Midhurst is at the Lions Park. If there's enough snow, our Director of Public Works is going to build a snow mountain, and if there isn't, well, they're going to play other games, and I want to thank Director of Public Works and Parks and Rec for their help.
Thank you. Councillor Austin.
Thank you. The Elmville BIA is planning to have another sci-fi fantasy party in July, and do some activities in the Gateway Park, something along the line of art and music in the park. So those are events to look forward to in the summertime.
Thank you. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. This weekend is Minnesing's Mini Fest. So if everyone wants to come out for bowling and skating and beer gardens and pancake breakfast and euchre and tea making, boiling, what else do they have? They have a lot to offer. So it's a great weekend and an incredible community. So if you have the opportunity to come out to that, I'd love to see everyone there.
Good. Anything else? Well, just so everybody knows, Friday is Food Freedom Day. Food Freedom Day. No. As a matter of fact, this is an initiative by the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and basically they've assessed that basically up until this Friday, the average family, the income that they've earned up to that point pays for their groceries for the year. And this year, shows you how things are happening, is one day later because of inflation and cost of food. So, and as a matter of fact, the Simcoe County Federation of Agriculture, to promote it, they have a number of local food baskets that are prepared and taken to the various media around the area to promote it. So, Food Freedom Day. Anything else? Yes, Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. Just noted in the correspondence, the TD, if you wanted to speak to that.
Well, the follow-up from our the MP, but there's no updates on the bank except for the meeting 13th, yeah, next week, yeah. Yes. And that one is open to the public, you know, and there's supposed to be some senior management from the TD to address, you know, the general concerns and that, but it's probably going to be fairly civilized because the business one was quite civilized. And again, there doesn't seem to be any changes in their direction, and we have no idea what they are going to do with the building, but hopefully that information will be coming forward in the near future. And we have no feedback yet from any other financial institution that would like to come in and take the place of TD in the township of Springwater. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. I'm not sure if Councillor Ritchie wanted to speak to EDHS Times capsule today.
Yes, Councillor Ritchie, you were there.
I was there today, and they pulled up some stuff from 1965, several editions starting from 1953, 1965. There was another edition in the 1980s, a few photographs and a few classes, nothing much to speak of. I was speaking with George Allen, who chairs the fundraising, and our fundraising right now, we're $237,000 in change, and it's growing. So we're doing quite well with that. And they're moving along quite well with the school too. So that's moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mayor French. Deputy Mayor Allen has reminded me to welcome HGR Graham, a new law firm, who's going to be, has had its open house yesterday. They currently have office space in the REMAX building, but within a few months they're going to be relocating to Main Street in Elmville. So we welcome that new law firm to our village.
Good. Anything else? Okay, moving on to notices of motion. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mayor French. I'm going to be presenting a motion hopefully at the February 21st council meeting. It's calling on the Ontario government to restore the historic funding to the community libraries. In the last 20 years, the funding for libraries has decreased by over 60%, and the motion will be asking for specific increases to community library funding so that no longer will it be such a big burden on the municipal township.
Good, thank you. And we can kind of clean up any wording in that with the clerk before that particular time. Yeah, that's good. Okay. And there's no notices that there's no motions that notice has been given. So move on to items for future consideration. Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor, and I just want to thank staff when you receive requests from members of council and you respond back to all of council. I want to say appreciate that, because you can't always be sure that if it's something to do with a councillor's ward and somebody from another ward, or something to do with a hall board, you can't always be sure that that member of that ward or hall board gets the information. So when you respond back, if you could copy all of us, I'd appreciate it, or at least me if it's in my ward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I guess there's two things, and I think we have to be careful on responding to all, but it is very appropriate when something happens and someone else is asking a question, and if it's relative to something in our ward, it's certainly appropriate that the ward councillor obviously be included in that. Do you want to give us any direction, because of the caution and concern now of serial meetings and all those things? Can you give us some guidance in those kind of responses so we don't kind of get into some nervous territory?
Yes, to ensure that you're not going against meeting rules in the Municipal Act, it's better off to send your question, comment, concern, whatnot to staff. And if the intent is for an answer to be provided to all of council, that's what the staff member will do. Generally, our rule of thumb is if we do receive a question from one member of council, we respond and CC all of council so that everybody has the same information, but refrain from emailing all members of council with your questions, comments, whatnot.
But yeah, I think the point is, because sometimes I try and remember, I'm sure I've gotten a few times, I may get direct communication, and I try and copy the council member where I may have got that question from, so they are aware of what's in the loop. Okay. Any other items for future consideration? Okay. Then I need for the bylaws, a mover and a seconder. McConkey and Coghlan. That the bylaws listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? Carried. And now the confirmatory bylaw, a mover and a seconder. Oh, you can stay here for a while. Hannah and Coughlin. I'm sure I did. Yeah, it's a bylaw. That was a bylaw. Yeah, sorry. Moved by Hannah and second by Coughlin. That bylaw 2018-007 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the regular meeting held on February 6, 2018, listed here and be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? Carried. And the adjournment, who would like to move that? McConkey. Okay, Austin. Okay. That the regular meeting of the Township of Springwater is now adjourned 9:43 p.m. to meet again in the regular meeting February 21st, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. in the Council Chambers Administrative Center, Minising. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone, and anybody that's still tuning in with us at home, thank you for participating.